Prelude Part 1. A hard decision. The ninja of Kanehagakure no Sato were rumored to be the strongest of all the hidden villages. They had been the first to establish a hidden village, and had continually emerged as the victors in all the wars they had participated in. However, the strength of all the mightiest mortals in the world were nothing compared to a demon, especially the strongest of the Bijou, the infamous tailed beasts, the Kyubi no Yoko. However, the brave ninja of Konoha raged against the demon fox with all their might. The surrounding area had been leveled of any sign of natural life, aside from those ninja who still stood. Lifeless bodies littered the once great forest's floor, a majority not even whole, having been clawed, stomped on or crushed by the giant fox. The most gruesome sights were the mangled bodies of those the Kyubi decided to dine upon. "Hold it back. We need to hold it until Yandame-sama arrives," the frantic cry of an Anbu called, clearly wounded, as he prepared to release a spray of flames at the beast. A Konoha Jounin panted as he let the chakra in his attack dissipate. "We cannot let it reach Konoha. If that happens, we are all doomed." Several more minutes passed, as the Kyubi took to ravaging on more of the shinobi. The injured Anbu was swept up in one of its massive 9 tails, before being thrown into the beast's open mouth. A resounding boom filled the area as a dark shadow flew overhead, before landing directly across from the Kyubi. The moonlight passed over the shadow, revealing a toad of giant proportions and a blonde-haired shinobi standing atop it. The ninja wasted no time, his hands moving into the necessary hand seals for his final technique. A low rumbling came from the Kyubi, somewhat reminiscent of a chuckle, before it raised its paw and slashed at the toad, cutting across its left eye. The ninja finished his hand seals and looked down as tears slid down his face.
"Sumimasen, Naruto-kun."
A bright, bluish-white light encompassed the area, leaving the surviving ninja temporarily blinded. It resonated once, before it fell away, revealing a barren field, lacking the giant toad from before, and more importantly, lacking the Kyubi no Yoko. A white-haired figure darted across the field, appearing in time to catch the falling form of the blonde shinobi. "You did well, kid. Rest now, Yandame Hokage of Konoha." 3 weeks later. A tiny, blonde-haired baby lay in his crib, unaware of the danger he was about to face. On each of his cheeks, 3 long whisker-like birthmarks stretched out, and a dark black seal was visible on his exposed belly in the moonlight that managed to break through the blinds covering the window. A ninja appeared from the shadows, his chest covered by nothing but the green flak jacket awarded to Chunin of Konoha, and a Hitai-8 tied around his left bicep, bearing the leaf insignia of Konoha. A malicious smirk was stretched across his face as he walked toward the crib, a piece of paper dangling from between his fingers. "This is for my brother, you demon scum." The ninja slapped the piece of paper onto the baby's forehead, his smirk growing wider as the kanji that covered the strip of paper began to glow. He began to turn away when he noticed something that shouldn't be happening. The paper was beginning to fold in on itself, and the glow of the kanji was rapidly diminishing. The once explosive seal glowed a deep red before it finally imploded, leaving the baby unharmed.
"Naruto-kun."
The ninja swore and immediately began his attempt at escape, a cloud of white smoke covering his disappearance. Not a second later, the robe-clad figure of Sarutobi Hiruzen burst through the door, a pair of Anbu at his side. "Do a sweep of the vicinity and find whoever was in this room. When they are apprehended, they are to be given to Ibiki's young protege, Anko." The 2 Anbu nodded and seemed to melt into the floor, leaving the Hokage alone in the room with Naruto. He walked over to the crib and glanced down into it, watching as Naruto slept on, ignorant of what could have just happened. "What am I going to do with you, Naruto-kun?" 3 years later. Naruto, now 3 years of age, skipped across the hardwood floors of the Hokage's office as he looked for his favorite old man. His tummy rumbled as he finally got around to the other side of the large desk, and he took a handful of the Hokage's white robes, yanking as hard as he could with a toothy grin plastered over his face. "Ji-chan, can we go get ramen?" Sarutobi smiled warmly down at the lad, his eyes crinkling as they almost closed. Bending down, he hefted Naruto up onto his lap with a grunt. Yar, Naruto. You are getting big. Maybe you've been eating too much ramen. He poked the boy's stomach, eliciting a giggle from the blonde. The young child shook his head in earnest as his giggles died down, his former grin settling into a cute pout. Ramen is the best. No other food can beat it. Sarutobi let out an amused sigh and shook his head. He was just like his mother with his stubborn attitude and obsession with ramen. Hopefully he could break the addiction just as he had with Kushina. Standing, he moved Naruto over his head and onto his shoulders, chuckling as Naruto grabbed the Hokage hat and threw it on his head. The hat slid down until it covered his eyes completely, and the little boy was forced to tilt it up, a sheepish grin across his features. With a minor amount of concentration, Sarutobi shunshined out of the office, Naruto letting out a cry of joy at the incredible speed. The duo appeared in the street just outside of the famous Ichiraku ramen bar, and Sarutobi smiled to Tucci as he entered. Okay, Naruto, miso again? The little boy bopped his head up and down, causing the hat to flop around wildly before covering his eyes again. Tucci laughed loudly, before turning to his pots and preparing the ramen. Sarutobi sat down and moved Naruto onto a stool of his own, before he started to contemplate if he received his missive. Unknown location. In the dank, half-lit room, two shadowy figures could be made out in the flickering light produced by the torches. Water could be heard dripping somewhere nearby, and if one were to breathe through their nose, they would be hit with the foul scent of a sewer. You have your orders. Kill the demon bearer the first chance you have. Now go.
Hai, Dando-sama.
With that, the second of the two figures disappeared in naught but a flicker of light, leaving the first alone. The fires raged for a moment, revealed the disfigured form of Danzo, the leader of Root and the Hokage's #1 nemesis. Soon, Sarutobi would be too busy grieving to be the Hokage. Danzo would call a vote of no confidence and then he would be the Hokage. Sarutobi Manor. Naruto sat atop his bed. A scroll on chakra unraveled across his lap. It had been a surprise to everyone when Naruto, a 3-year-old child, began to read and even understand the scrolls in the manor's library. He was without a doubt a genius. Sarutobi had left Naruto in the manor, going back to finish off his last stack of paperwork for the day. Unknown to him, he had left Naruto in a most dangerous situation. A figure warped out of the shadows of the corner of Naruto's room before dashing forward, kunai glistening in the fading rays of sunlight. Just as the black-clad shinobi reached his target, he frowned as he lunged forward, not realizing where the feeling of unease was coming from until his kunai passed through the boy in front of him. Genjutsu? The shinobi turned slightly, only to see a pissed of Hokage standing in the doorway. His left hand held in a half-ram seal while his right was resting on Naruto's shoulder. The smirk that crossed the old man's face made the shinobi shiver, and in seconds he was bound and shipped off to Ibiki. The screams would only be remembered in the ANBU torture and interrogation department for many nights to come. Got to love silencing seals. Hokage's office. Sarutobi pinched the bridge of his nose, taking a long draw on his pipe before letting loose a billow of smoke. Smoking always helped him to relax. Naruto, 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 what am I going to do with you? Well, there is always the option of sending him with me. Sarutobi grinned as he recognized the voice. I see you got my message. It's been a while, Takizo Kenji. He turned slowly to see the visage of a tall, middle-aged brunette with a lopsided grin splayed across his tanned face, sitting in the windowsill. Indeed it has, old man. Kenji dropped from the windowsill, landing in a half-crouch before standing to his full 6 feet 2 inches. So, where is he? Sarutobi nodded and turned in his chair once more. Naruto-kun, there is someone here I would like you to meet. He is an old friend of mine. Naruto nodded before he hopped off his chair, leaving his scroll on chakra behind, and shuffled his way over to the two men. He glanced towards the first one, who was leaning against the windowsill, and frowned when he didn't recognize the man. Naruto knew most of the ANBU that came into the Hokage's office regularly, so this guy wasn't part of ANBU. Craning his neck, he looked across towards the Hokage. Hiruzen chuckled at the look on his ward's face. This, Naruto, is Takizo Kenji, one of the finest ninja to come out of Konoha. He used to be teammates with the Yondaime. He will be your new sensei for a while. Naruto turned around again, and Kenji grinned down at the little blonde. Don't worry, brat. I won't rough you up. Too much at least. Naruto pouted and folded his arms over his chest. I am no brat. For your information, I am 3.5. Kenji laughed and waved his hand in front of his face. My apologies. 3.5. That certainly isn't brat material at all. Sarutobi laughed as Naruto's pout got even deeper. Oi, old man, I want to take him to my farm. I can teach him far easier out there, and he will be away from the less desirable parts of Konoha. The Hokage's grin quickly morphed into a frown. He had been hoping on Kenji moving back to Konoha for a while to look after Naruto. Letting out a sigh, he realized that he shouldn't have hoped for so much. With a simple nod, the Hokage gave his assent to the shinobi-turned-farmer's request. Naruto jumped up onto the Hokage's lap with a surprising nimbleness, at least to Kenji, and looked straight into the old eyes of Sarutobi. Am I leaving? The Hokage nodded once again, and felt Naruto's little arms wrap around his neck. Okay, Ji-chan. I'll miss you. The Hokage could hear the unshed tears in the boy's voice, and hugged him tightly. I'll miss you too, Naruto-kun. Kenji cleared his throat, and the Hokage couldn't help but sigh for what he felt was the 100th time that night. It's time to go, Naruto. Prelude Part 2. The road starts here. The harsh, midday sun beat down onto the fields surrounding the Takizo household. Naruto had long since taken off his shirt and tied it around his head to stop the sweat falling into his eyes. He had been working since dawn and had since given up on finishing all of his chores before lunch. Apparently this was all for endurance training. TCH, yeah right? Kenji Tusan just wants to get out of doing his own chores. Again, Naruto grumbled under his breath as he brought his hoe down into the soil. Talking to yourself again, Naruto? Naruto smirked and swung around, lashing out with the farming tool, and narrowly missed the side of a boy his age. The boy mimicked Naruto's expression and spun his own hoe around, before moving to attack Naruto. The blonde caught the makeshift staff with his own before he pushed as hard as he could, knocking the other child off balance. Following up, Naruto threw a roundhouse kick towards the boy's head. The brunette ducked under the kick and swung his hoe out at Naruto's foot remaining on the ground. Naruto used Kenji's favorite curse as he hopped, moving out of the hoe's path. Naruto spiraled in the air, landing in crouch about a meter away from the child. They both grinned before lunging at each other, only to be stopped by an amused-looking Kenji. That's enough of that, Miyamoto, Naruto. Your mother will kill me if you don't get inside and get washed up right now. Lunch is about to be served. Naruto grinned and nodded to Kenji, whilst Miyamoto merely smiled. He wasn't as big on stuffing himself, till he exploded like Naruto was. Kenji's face had a faraway look for a moment before he focused in on his son and his ward. Tell you what, after lunch we can put together a training regime. You will both start your ninja training tomorrow. Naruto whooped for joy. He had been living with the Takizo family for 3 years, and only 6 months ago had he been deemed old enough to start the physical work on the farm. Now, he was finally going to begin his training. With his current knowledge of chakra, and the fact he had developed a photographic memory, the 6.5-year-old was already at an advantage over his brother, Miyamoto. The boys took off at a sprint, racing towards the house. Miyamoto pulled ahead for a second before Naruto's animal-like agility kicked in and the blonde jumped onto the brunette's back, using it as a springboard to win the race. Kenji followed at a more sedate pace, laughing all the way. Kenji leant against a support beam in the barn, his arms folded across his chest, while his 2 new students sat on hay bales in front of him. Right, well then, let me begin by saying from this point on, whenever we are training, I am not your father. I am your sensei, and I will push you to and beyond your limits. Receiving nods from both boys, he continued. Now, what I am going to teach you will encompass several aspects of the old ninja juhaki. These, before the times of chakra, were essential to the life of a ninja. However, with the discovery of chakra, and with it ninjutsu and genjutsu, it has become mostly obsolete. My family has long practiced certain aspects of the juhaki, and so will you. The first and most important is spiritual refinement. This translates to honing your chakra control and developing your chakra reserves. This is vital to your career as a shinobi. Next up is taijutsu, the art of physical combat. This encompasses both martial arts and minor weapons. After that is disguise and impersonation, which isn't as vital to ninja these days as it was when ninja first came into existence, so we no longer practice it. Now then, this one is very important as well, shinobi iri, which are your methods of stealth. This is a fundamental aspect of being a shinobi. We hide in the shadows and strike when the opportune moment arrives. However, this is more focused on the generic ninja, the background workers, as the elite of each village are to be seen and are what attracts clients to a village. Following is tactics, which you better learn and learn well if you want to survive, along with tenmon, which is geographical knowledge or meteorology. There are many other aspects, which you will likely focus on later, depending on what career path you follow. Now then, let's start with chakra control training. A year and 6 months pass. Naruto grunted as he felt the strain on his upper arms, before he was forced to lower his face to the barn floor by the foot on his back. The pressure was relieved and Naruto pushed up, before being pushing back down again. Sweat trickled down his face, pooling on the tip of his nose before it fell to the ground. 148. 149. 150. Good work. Now, 50 vertical push-ups and then 20 sets of high kicks. Go. The blonde whimpered but did as he was instructed, kicking his legs off the ground and into the air, keeping his body completely straight, before he began his push-ups. As he fell into the mundane routine, he started to think about his past 30 months on the farm. Kenji had worked purely on chakra control and stamina for the first 3 weeks, and in that time had managed to get both boys to genin level control through his rather harsh training methods. He had to force back a shudder when he recalled the kunai launcher incident. After that, they had worked on a combination of taijutsu, muscle development, and a little more chakra control for near 2 months. It seemed Kenji's plan was to raise his students' abilities in certain areas to a certain rank, before he rotated to the next set of skills. The weapons training had been interesting and Kenji had copped more than one beating via Haruai, his wife, when she saw her boys all cut up and bruised. After Kenji caught the boys snickering after one such beating, he sparred them one-on-one, severely beating them into the ground. The next couple of months were spent in the forests near the Takizo property, where Kenji taught the boys necessary survival skills like foraging, hunting, how to set up a shinobi camp. There was a lot of father-son bonding during those months, along with a hell of a lot more taijutsu training for the boys after Kenji failed in his attempt at fishing. After that, the trio spent most of their time playing strategy games like shogi and go, and Naruto shocked everyone at how good he was. Between games, they would refine their chakra control and practice the few jutsu they had been shown, which included the 3 standard academy jutsu that Konoha taught to its students. When they finally finished with that, they essentially repeated the process, being taught more jutsu the second time around and getting better overall as potential ninja. Phew! Naruto grinned as he finished his exercise and came out of his musings. He snatched his towel from a nearby hay bale and wiped the sweat from his face, before turning to Kenji. Naruto, you know that Miyamoto left a month ago to train with some old friends of mine. I think it's about time you decided on which weapon you are going to use. You know our family traditions. Naruto groaned and scratched the back of his neck. Damn right he knew Miyamoto had left. It left Naruto alone with Kenji's occasionally psychotic training methods. His brunette brother in all but blood had left with a bunch of traveling warrior monks on pilgrimage that Kenji had befriended several years ago. Miyamoto had been enthralled by their display of skill with their staves and immediately decided to use that as his weapon. The blonde 9-year-old walked out into the midday sun, enjoying the heat it brought to his naked chest. I'll use a sword, old man. Kenji nodded. Good to know someone will be carrying on the legacy. Huh. Kenji led Naruto into a dark room situated underneath the main house, lit by only a few torches and candles. Off to the left side was a desk with scrolls piled onto it. Some had fallen off onto the floor next to it. To the right was a set of what looked like a cross between samurai armor and old-style shinobi gear. However, what really caught Naruto's attention was the redwood stand in the center of the room. Sitting atop it was a katana. The sheath alone was breathtaking and almost looked alive. Seemingly random splotches of jade, Crimson and golden yellow were woven together in a way that resembled a bird in flight. When the candlelight flickered, the pattern looked like the bird was actually moving up and down it. The tsubo was golden in color, and if Naruto was right, it was solid gold. It was fashioned in the shape of a heron, with the wings coming up to meet the head. The hilt was fit with a forest green-colored wrapping and had ruby diamonds running down each side of it. This Naruto is my study. You see, when I was an active ninja, I used a sword just like you want to. I even earned a moniker during the war. Konoha no Hijui Hitokiri, Konoha's Jade Manslayer. Naruto was in awe. His sensei, adoptive father, was a war hero? Well, if he really thought about it, it wasn't that much of a shock. Sarutobi had said that Kenji was one of the best ninjas ever to come from Konoha. And now, you will train to become a blade-wielding shinobi. Prelude Part 3. Moonlit Wanderings. The early morning air carried the scent of the forest through the small fields. The grass crunched underfoot, as it should with the first frost of the snow. The morning birds sang brightly, but softly, as if careful not to disturb the still sleeping wildlife. Clang. Steel met steel, sending sparks flying, before the two figures jumped away from one another. The smaller of the figures launched forward again as soon as he landed, sending dew flying into the air. The swords collided again, sparks lighting up between the two blades, before they once more separated. The first figure, the short one, had blonde hair that was normally spiky, but without something to support it, it had fallen slightly to cover his forehead and eyes in the current atmosphere. Covering his upper body was a blue turtleneck tank top, which had mesh armor woven between the two layers of cloth. He also wore black, baggy pants which were held up by a simple gray belt. Strapped over his shoulder was a simple katana sheath, which normally housed the sword that was currently in his hands. The second figure had brown hair that fell messily around his face and down to his neck. He wore nothing but a simple pair of baggy farming pants, which were tied up at the bottom to keep from flapping about too much, and a V-neck shirt. Resting in his right hand was a beautiful katana, the blade shining in the morning sunlight, and in his left he held its sheath, the forest green with a heron-like creature woven into it. The blonde exhaled, watching as his smoke-like breath became visible in the cool air. Kenji-sensei, when were you leaving again? Kenji spun his katana a few times before sliding the blade into its sheath. A few hours at most. I need to check on Miyamoto's progress. Why? Naruto sighed and swung his katana to the side with a grunt, sending the dew that had gathered on it flying. Just wondering, do I keep training like I have while you're gone? Or what? He sheathed the blade, satisfied when he heard the click of it snapping into place. His mentor grinned as he walked over to Naruto, clapping his free hand onto the boy's shoulder. You, my boy, will be getting instruction from an old acquaintance of mine. He owes me a favor or four, so I'm calling one in while I'm gone for the next few months. Cerulean eyes locked with dark green ones as Naruto's face contorted in confusion. Who? Oh, don't tell me it's the Ino Shikacho trio again. I don't think my body can withstand that kind of beating. Kenji's chest rumbled as he laughed. He remembered that fortnight. The trio had stopped by when Inoichi had been injured on a mission, seeking help from his wife Haruai. Whilst they waited for the blonde man to completely heal, Shikaku and Choza had saw fit to give Naruto some extra training. He had never seen the little boy run so fast in his life. Then again, even Kenji was afraid of Choza's Nakuden Sensha. No, it won't be those three. This guy is a former Kirigakure shinobi, and one hell of a swordsman. However, he won't get here for another day or so. During that time, I want you to work on this jutsu. I know you still have problems with the normal bunshin, even though your control has gotten better. Kenji reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick scroll. Throwing it over to his student, he smiled when he saw Naruto's eyes light up. Kage Bunshin was a Konoha technique, and most likely one of the most versatile of the Bunshin line of ninjutsu. Naruto waited for Kenji to leave the clearing before he immediately snapped open the scroll and began to read. Similar to the standard Bunshin jutsu, Kage Bunshin creates copies of the user. However, these copies are not mere illusions. They are physical clones that can interact with the world. The user's chakra is evenly distributed amongst all the clones, giving each clone an equal fraction of the user's overall power. The shadow clones are capable of using jutsu on their own, and can even bleed. However, they will disperse after a few solid hits. The clones are also capable of dispersing themselves. Any experience the clones gain during their existence is transferred to the user once they are dispersed. Any extra chakra the clone has when it disperses is also returned to the original. The hand seals are officially Hitsuji, Hibi, and a modified Tora seal. You just adjust your hands to form a cross. Honestly, most people just shorten it to the modified Tora. P.S. This jutsu is great for training. PPS. Good luck, Naruto. Kenji. Naruto grinned widely. He could tell that the first paragraph must have been written by someone like the Sandame. There was no way Kenji was that good at writing. All the same, his new jutsu was awesome. Tucking the scroll into his pocket, he carefully made the hand seals, checking that the modified Tora was right before he focused his chakra. To his surprise, a loud bang sounded through the clearing, accompanied by a cloud of white smoke and an identical doppelganger. Naruto leaned forward, the Kage Naruto mimicking his actions. Holding out his hand, the Kage Naruto followed the action and pressed his hand to his master's. When the original felt the actual contact, he grinned and started his little victory dance. To his further amusement, so did his clone. Right, let's test this thing out. Naruto punched the clone in the shoulder, which only knocked it back a bit, before he followed up with a roundhouse kick to the clone's head. The clone dissipated on impact, and Naruto grinned. Repeated the cross-shaped Tora seal. He called up another 3 clones and sent them off into the forest. Play a game of John Kenpon, and then dismiss yourself. Naruto waited while his clones disappeared into the trees. After a few minutes of waiting, he discovered that not only had the clones gone into the woods and he won and lost? Okay, that was confusing, but one had also done a transformation jutsu. This is going to be so awesome. And so Naruto made what was fast becoming his favorite hand seal. Haruai was by no means a fussy woman. She was rather laid back, but still made sure her children, including her husband, were always looked after. So when Naruto didn't turn up for lunch or dinner, she started to get worried and went to look for him. The cheerful woman had spent most of her adult life in various small clinics until she had married, and even then she still spent a lot of time in the Konoha hospital, learning some very basic medical ninjutsu and helping where she could. So naturally, she was a skilled healer and had a fair bit of experience when it came to odd wounds. However, when she finally found her adopted son beaten, bruised and cut up, she wasn't exactly sure what to do. It wasn't the fact he had wounds, he got them all the time when he was training, but it was the fact that they were healing at such a rapid rate. Normally, bruises like that would take at least a day or 2 to heal, but what few she could see were disappearing before her eyes, and the cuts that littered his arms, hand and face were already healing. Not scabbing over like a normal wound, but the skin looked to be regrowing itself in perfect form. The last time she had come across healing of a similar rate was a young woman with an incredible Kekai Genkai that accelerated the healing process. Naruto groaned, and Haruai's brown eyes shifted from the cuts and bruises on the blonde's arm to his face, where his eyelids were flickering. Naruto-kun, wake up. Yar, yar. Naruto yawned widely, and Haruai couldn't help but be drawn to the fang-like canine teeth that Naruto had. Honestly, when he was younger he looked a lot like a vampire because those teeth grew so quickly. Naruto blinked a few times to get the sleep out of his eyes before he really took notice of the black-haired woman standing over him. Haruai-ka-chan. What time is it? The woman sighed and pulled Naruto up by the shoulders. Time for you to go and get cleaned up for dinner, young man. Naruto grinned sheepishly and rubbed the back of his neck. Hi, hi! The blonde took off towards the house, rolling his shoulders as he went and grinned when a satisfying pop resounded through the clearing. Haruai, however, was frowning in thought. She really needed to talk to Kenji. The moment Naruto finished dinner, which helped to restore his dwindling chakra reserves from the day's training, he had gone back to his clearing in the forest. Quickly formed the cross-shaped Tora hand seal, Naruto summoned up a group of 50 clones. Yash, I want 15 of you to go back to the house and read the scrolls in my room and the ones that Kenji-sensei prepared in advance. Okay, I want the next 15 to work on chakra control, tree walking. I want the next 10 to go and work on that Shunshin Jutsu I read about yesterday, and the last 10 will work on mastering that futon de tapa that sensei taught me a month ago. Go! The clones immediately split, kicking up a great deal of wind and leaves. Naruto grinned and made the cross-shaped hand seal again, but this time poured at least half of what chakra he had left into a single clone. You and I are sparring on the lake. Naruto and his doppelganger started towards the lake at full speed, each drawing their katana as they moved. Naruto's foot touched down onto the lake's surface, and he subconsciously started to pass chakra through his feet to keep atop the water. Spinning on the ball of his foot, Naruto immediately launched into a swift assault on his clone. Time after time, the clone blocked all of Naruto's attack with its own sword, before launching into a counteroffensive. Naruto swore and slipped under the first swing, a wide cut that probably had enough power to cleave a man's head from his shoulders, and slammed his foot into the clone's solar plexus. Naruto grinned when he saw the clone double over and spit up bile whilst he hovered in the air from the force of the blow. Naruto loved these clones. They were far more resilient than the ones he normally created and much better for sparring with. Pivoting, Naruto swung his other foot into a makeshift roundhouse kick and kicked the clone in the skull, sending it flying off towards the bank. Naruto sucked in a deep breath, taking in the smells of the night. It was probably past midnight by now, but Naruto enjoyed this time of day more than any, especially in the early times of winter. The sounds of the nocturnal critters running about in the woods, the earthly scent that the wind carried from the forests surrounding the farm, the feeling of the soft breeze running over him as if in an attempt to keep him company. He loved all of it. His eyes were half-lidded at the moment, his relaxed state allowing him to take in his surroundings without his danger instincts running them. He saw a flash of white hop through his clearing, and smiled when he recognized it was a rabbit. The rabbit stopped and looked at him for a minute, where Naruto smiled even wider, before it started to hop away again. Before the rabbit could reach the edge of the clearing, a bluish blur shot across and snatched up the snow-white critter. Usagi-chan, how many times have I told you not to run away? The figure questioned the rabbit. Naruto chuckled a little and opened his eyes completely, not leaving his Indian-style posture. I'm sure he just wanted to enjoy the forest. It is a beautiful night after all. The figure snapped around, the moonlight revealing her face, and Naruto inhaled sharply. Naruto was only 10.5 years old, but he could still appreciate beauty when he saw it. The girl had brown hair that fell down her back, and chocolate brown eyes that seemed to shine in the moonlight. Naruto couldn't but blush, and a goofy-looking grin spread across his face. I agree, the girl began. But that doesn't mean Usagi-chan should just run off without me. He might get lost or hurt. Naruto nodded in agreement and the girl giggled. She made her way over to the blonde and sat down across from him, Usagi-chan struggling for freedom in her lap. So, who are you and what are you doing out in the forest this late at night? Aside from rescuing Usagi-chan, of course. Naruto asked. My name is Haku, the girl answered, and I am staying at a farm nearby for a few months. How about you? Naruto's grin lowered slightly. She was staying at the farm? I'm Naruto, and I live on the farm. I didn't know we were having guests. Haku just shrugged. Zabuza-sama only told me we would be staying at a friend of his for a month or more. Naruto shrugged as well and stood up, brushing off his pants and holding out a hand for the obviously older girl to take. I was going to go for a walk before I headed in. You want to come with? Haku took Naruto's calloused hand and pulled herself up to her feet with a huff. She had just sat down too. Sure, why not? The pair made their way into the forest, Naruto's katana out and hanging loosely in his grip just in case one of the wolves that stalked the forest got frisky. The pair talked about stuffs in general, mostly their training as a ninja and Haku's experiences traveling with her mentor and makeshift father Zabuza. When she mentioned he was a Kirigakure missing ninja, Naruto grinned and realized he must be the sensei that Kenji had set up. So, you've been around pretty much the entire elemental nations with Zabuza? That sounds pretty awesome. I guess, Haku sighed. But I'd really like to be able to just settle down in one place for a while. I've never really had a chance to make any friends with the constant travel and running from the Hunter Nin. Naruto glanced across to Haku and put on a big grin. Hey, you're here for at least a month, right? We can be friends. And I bet Haruika-chan will love having another girl around the house for once. Haku smiled softly at Naruto and looked rather serene despite the fiercely struggling rabbit in her arms. I would like that, Naruto-kun.
Prélude, finale.
Destiny waits for no man. Naruto was lying atop the barn roof, staring blankly into the afternoon sky as he reminisced on the past 6 months of his life. He had met a wonderful girl, Haku, who was a few years older than him and a hell of a kunoichi. The couple had grown close over the months, and Naruto admitted he had a crush on her, much to his adoptive father's amusement. With the meeting of Haku had come the meeting with his kenjutsu instructor, Mamachi Zabuza. The first month had been hell. Naruto had found Zabuza to be condescending, arrogant, and a downright harsh taskmaster. When they had first met, Zabuza just snorted and outright refused to train Naruto until the blonde could land a hit on the former Kirigakure ninja. Naruto, taking up the challenge, had been beaten into the ground rather soundly time and again, and although he didn't realize it at first, every time he failed but still got back up, he learned something new. The subtle ways Zabuza manipulated his blade, and the precise movements that wasted no energy, Naruto naturally grasped and in turn used. Zabuza admitted that he had never seen someone with so much raw potential before meeting Naruto. After that first month, where Naruto had managed to hit Zabuza at the end, the true training began. Zabuza's attitude changed little during training times, but he was like an annoying older brother or young uncle whenever they weren't. Naruto had gone from learning with a katana to a broadsword, and then a ninjato, learning how to wield all of them effectively. And while Naruto loved to learn, his favorite times were the breaks between training sessions when he would go off into the woods with Haku for hours at a time. Kenji had returned about 3 months after going to check up on his son, Miyamoto, and had taken a back seat in Naruto's training so he could attend to his farm. He still carried on teaching his adopted child the basics that they had began with, but the advanced aspects of Naruto's training fell to Zabuza. Naruto had gone on several trips with both of the older men, them claiming that the sharpest of swords is useless in the hands of an inexperienced wielder, basically meaning he needed more life experience before he dedicated his entire life to being a ninja of Konoha. Naruto was drawn from his reminiscing when he felt more than saw Haku sit down beside him on the roof. She was the reason he was up here in the first place. Haku and Zabuza would be leaving tomorrow, and he really didn't want them to leave. He treasured them too much to want to let them go. Naruto, Haku started, not quite sure what to say. Said blonde remained silent. Watching a cloud float by that looked a hell of a lot like Zabuza's sword, Kubikiri Hocho. The cloud had an odd orange glow, courtesy of the sun that was finally starting to fall over the horizon. Naruto lifted his arm and shifted his fingers so it looked like he was holding the giant sword cloud. Naruto, please don't ignore me. You know our reasons for leaving. We can't stay in one place too long. In fact, I'm surprised Zabuza-sama let us stay this long.
Haku pleaded.
She really didn't want to leave on bad terms with her only friend. Naruto frowned and balled his hand into a fist, in an attempt to destroy the cloud. I've heard that 1,000 times already, Haku-chan, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. You're not the only one, muttered the brunette, sliding down the roof so she was lying down beside Naruto. The pair stayed there until the sky was fading into the red-purplish blue of twilight, just talking about anything that came to mind. Naruto was the first to stand up, a heavy sigh escaping his lips as he stared out at the horizon. "Want to know something? Aside from my family, you were the first friend I've ever had," Naruto said. "Kenji and Haruai gave me plenty of chances to turn away from being a ninja and just lead a normal life. But I wanted so much to make Kenji proud, you know? So I dedicated my entire life to becoming a ninja, ever since I could read. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen to be a normal kid." Naruto stared at the sun a few more moments before throwing his hands up. "Bah! I sound like an old man. I need to stop playing shogi with the old men in the village." Naruto grinned at Haku and helped her up. "You know I'm going to miss having you here." Haku smiled sadly before her arms snaked around Naruto's neck and she nuzzled into his shoulder. "I'm going to miss you too, Naruto-kun, but we'll see each other again. I know that much." He couldn't help but sigh again. He wasn't so sure. She would be traveling again with Zabuza soon, and Naruto would be leaving for Konoha sometime next year before his birthday. Sucking in a deep breath, Naruto noted the scent in her hair some kind of lily. He was so distracted that he barely noticed the way the final rays of the sun formed around the pair, almost like a red string around them. Kenji watched his adopted son from the kitchen window as he went through his morning chores by himself. Normally the child would make a few of his shadow clones to help him, but this morning something was definitely hampering the young blonde's normally cheerful demeanor. The 38-year-old man ran long, calloused fingers through his shaggy brown hair. His fatherhood instincts seemed to be severely lacking because he had no idea how to help Naruto. He had realized long ago that Naruto had a crush on Haku and knew that when she left it would hurt him, but he also knew there was no way to avoid it. For many, the life of a ninja was a lonely one. It was filled with courage, daring, and honor, but it left the shinobi friendless in most cases, aside from their family and team. Turning his gaze back to the hallway, he pictured the image of his wife, Haruai, sound asleep in their bed. He was one of the lucky ones that managed to quit the life before it ruined his chance at love. Shaking the image from his mind, he started towards the door when he caught sight of the calendar. Today was October the 1st. In 9 days, Naruto would turn 11 and he would finally learn about the Kyuubi. He let his fingers trail along the rail as he took the few steps down the porch and looked across to Naruto, currently tending to the pigs. "Oi, Naruto! Come on! It's time for breakfast!" Naruto watched from the top of the barn as Zabuza and Haku started on their way to their next destination, which would be God knows where. He rubbed softly at his watery eyes before turning away and jumping off the roof, landing in a crouch. He hadn't seen his brother in a long time, and now his only other friend was leaving as well. It was going to be back to the same boring old routine now. Naruto disappeared into the barn and grabbed one of the many bakken, wooden practice swords, he had crafted in his spare time. Twirling it a few times to check the balance, he made his way back outside and over to a lone stump of what was once a thick tree. Taking the wooden sword in both hands, he started whacking away at the stump in an attempt to vent his frustration. Before he could even really start to beat on the defenseless stump, he heard a soft whistling that sounded something similar to a saw, and it grew louder as if it was coming closer. That's when he realized it was. Twisting his ankle so he pivoted on the spot, Naruto brought the wooden sword up just in time. A pair of sharp thwacks sounded, and Naruto stared at the 2 shuriken that had been deeply embedded in his bakken. Naruto dropped to the ground and rolled out of the way just in time to avoid a large man dropping on top of him. The heavy thump rang through the field, signifying the sheer amount of force that had been put behind the attack. Naruto gulped and watched as his attacker rose, charging at him once more. Naruto sucked in a deep breath through his nose and twisted his spine, spiraling past the attacker with nimble footwork. Instincts, drilled into him since he was 6.5, took over from that point. His eyes dimmed a bit as he slipped a kunai from his pocket and moved to hold it at the attacker's throat. He was too slow, however, and the assailant ducked under the rising kunai and buried his elbow deep into Naruto's solar plexus. Naruto doubled over, coughing up a lung, while his assailant took a few steps forward and turned to face the blonde. "You've gotten better since last year, that much is for sure." Naruto glared up at the white-haired man. He was dressed in rather flamboyant green clothing, with a red sleeveless haori, a kind of coat, and red geta, thick wooden sandals on top of 2 wooden slabs. 2 red lines streaked down from the corner of his eyes, and a wide grin was plastered on his face. "Tch, like it matters. You are still way faster," Naruto complained. "What are you doing here anyway? I thought you weren't due back until my birthday." The man's grin grew ever wider as he picked Naruto up off the ground. "What? Can't I come and see my favorite godson before the assigned date?" Naruto raised an eyebrow at him and Jiraiya just laughed. Naruto acted so much like Minato at times, but others he was more like his mother, Kushina. Seeing Naruto still glaring at him, he sighed and waved his hands about. All right. I needed to deliver a message in person to the old man. I figured since I was in the area, I may as well stay. And it gives me a chance to help you finish that last scroll I gave you." Naruto grinned and threw his arm around his godfather's shoulders. Naruto loved Fuinjutsu, the art of sealing. It was one of the few arts that used chakra but wasn't only used by ninja. His father, the Yondaime, was a true master of Fuinjutsu. Jiraiya himself was a registered Fuinjutsu master as well. Naruto would be able to apply to become a journeyman of Fuinjutsu after he had become a shinobi. If he registered beforehand, he would have to go through a long and rather taxing process to have his journeyman rank transfer to his shinobi ID as well. Naruto spent the rest of the week and a half until his birthday training with Jiraiya. Haruai had pretty much forbidden the man to take Naruto as his apprentice until Naruto was old enough to decide for himself. Main reason: she didn't want her youngest boy to become a pervert like all the other men in the world. Although, she also wanted Naruto to be able to choose what he learnt, and with Jiraiya he would be constantly traveling. Naruto grinned at the feast that had been laid out before him. Miyamoto, who had returned a few days ago, sat to his left while Kenji sat on his right. Jiraiya and Haruai both sat towards the far end of the table and watched as Naruto grinned and grabbed the first piece of food. Ita de Kamasu. Naruto proceeded to have one of the best meals of his life. The food was great, the company was even better, and the conversation was surprisingly good. Soon after the meal had been torn about by the four boys, Haruai smiled softly and ushered the group into the small living room. Naruto was seated in Kenji's rather plush armchair, and the rest presented their presents to him. The first two gifts were presented by Haruai. The first was a promise to go to one of the larger cities in a few days and buy Naruto a new wardrobe and stock up on his supply of weapons. The second was a custom-made first aid kit, which Haku had prepared a few days before she had left. Naruto accepted the kit with a soft smile and placed it on his lap. The next gift was given to him by Kenji. The first part was a strangely shaped kunai, which had some kind of seal on the handle. Jiraiya gasped at the sight of it. Apparently it was one of his father's special kunai which he used in conjunction with his famed technique, the Hiraishin. The second gift was a straight short sword. This style of sword was one of Naruto's favorites, but he never had an actual one before. With a grin, he hugged his adoptive father. The third was from Jiraiya, an old-looking book that he explained was the first one he had ever written. It hadn't sold all that well, so he went on to writing smut instead. He also received a new sealing kit, a set of scrolls that all had inbuilt inkwells and could hold a brush. The final gift was from Miyamoto, a black necklace from which hung a strange stone. It was long, about the length of his pinky, and was almost pitch black in color. There were flecks of strange white through the black, but what had Naruto entranced was the stone itself. The back was rough, and in some parts a bit jagged, as if it had broken off from something. The front, in contrast, was completely smooth with a single scar running across it. The white flecks seemed to be prominent in the groove, giving it a strange, almost glowing quality against the black stone. Naruto immediately hung it around his neck and grinned at Miyamoto. It was surprisingly heavy given its size, but nothing Naruto couldn't put up with. With the gifts given, everyone wished Naruto a happy birthday and went off to do their own thing. Naruto stared at his new necklace a little while longer before shaking his head. Kenji still wanted to talk to him about something. Putting his presents aside, Naruto strode from the living room and down the hall. He slipped through the sliding doors that led to the basement and jogged down the stairs. The further down he went, the darker it got until there was no light but the slight flickering of a flame. Naruto looked around at his adopted father's study and grinned with glee. This was his second favorite room on the entire farm, the first being his and Miyamoto's. Naruto ran his hand over the sheath of the beautiful sword that sat atop the red pillar in the middle of the room before moving over to Kenji's desk. The older man wasn't down yet, so Naruto took this chance to see what Kenji actually did down here. Shuffling through the papers, he noticed a few letters from people he didn't know, a few more from people he did, and blueprints for the irrigation system Kenji had set up. Naruto moved them aside and found a letter written in handwriting he didn't recognize, but the name at the bottom he most certainly did. Namikaze Minato. Naruto took the letter and started to read it. Kenji, my friend, I haven't seen you in some time. I hope both Haruai and young Miyamoto are in good health. However, I fear this isn't a letter to simply catch up. You are well aware of the approaching Kyuubi. It will reach Konoha in mere hours, so I hope the courier gets this to you safely. Kushina gave birth to a boy, a beautiful baby son, but neither she nor I will not see him grow up. Kushina died giving birth. I have no choice, Kenji, but to use the dead demon consuming seal and the 8 trigram sealing style to seal the Kyuubi. I cannot ask this of some other family, so the duty falls to my son. I know he will be strong enough to handle this task. Please, Kenji, I beg you to take Naruto away from Konoha. I wish for the people of Konoha to see him as a hero, but I know they won't. They will see him as the demon reincarnate, and will try to kill him. I am truly sorry to leave him alone in the world, and hope he will forgive me for what I have done one day. Namikaze Minato. I got that letter 3 years after you were born. Naruto spun around, locating the source of the voice. Kenji was standing next to his katana, his normally mirthful eyes soft and filled with sadness. He never got to send it. Sarutobi found it when you were 3 and sent it to me with a note of his own. It's what I wanted to talk to you about today. You've probably already guessed that though. Nay? Naruto nodded once. He was the container of the Kyuubi no Yoko. I've known for a long time, probably 3 years now. Kenji's eyes widened. Remember when you made us meditate all the time? Well, after a while I kind of ended up in my subconscious mind, my mindscape. The Kyuubi was there, roaring about breaking out and devouring me. I haven't talked to him since, but I know he is there. There is also the fact that every time I mold chakra, a big-ass seal appears around my belly button. Kenji just stared at the blonde. He had figured it out. He was so much like Minato it was scary. He couldn't help but grin at the last sentence. That was definitely Kushina breaking through. But nevertheless, that made his life a bit easier. Now he didn't have to deal with a potentially deadly problem. Although, Naruto began, "Why didn't you tell me when you told me about my father?" Because, as the time, we wanted you to get used to the idea of Minato as your father, before you found out what he sealed inside you. I was afraid you might hate him. Naruto shrugged. When I finally put it all together last year, I did hate him. I understood that I was the most logical choice, but I can still remember my life before I came here. My photographic memory must have developed at a very young age. I thought it's his fault I was treated like crap. Why the hell couldn't he have sealed the damn demon into someone else's kid? But I guess if I was put into that position, I couldn't ask someone else to sacrifice their kid, so I kind of understand. Kenji shook his head in awe. You never cease to amaze me, Naruto. How did you get to be so wise? Naruto grinned. Why, I listened to you, of course. Naruto shifted his backpack so it was a little more comfortable. He had to go into the village today, which was a roughly 3-hour trip at a walk, to get some supplies. Kenji was busy with Jiraiya, and Haruai had work to do around the house, so the job fell to Naruto and Miyamoto. The trip was spent in silence. Miyamoto seemed to be in deep thought and Naruto wasn't going to disturb him. He was deadly with that staff of his. The blonde's eyes darted back and forth as they walked, taking in the details of the road. Trees lined either side of the dusty path, and they seemed to curve in towards the road, giving random splashes of shade here and there. This road was one of the few that led to the small village of Fushimi. Fushimi, whilst primarily a sake brewing town, was also home to many farm suppliers because of its proximity to the great farming lands surrounding it, and often had traveling merchants who would buy and sell produce. Naruto's favorite spot in the entire village was the waterfall that started on the 2nd level of the 3-level village, which had been built on series of small hills. The waterfall came from a natural underground spring and poured down into the river on the 1st level of the village. Naruto and Miyamoto split up the moment they entered the village, going to get the supplies they had each been assigned to gather. Naruto enjoyed talking to the older men who played shogi on their porches, chatting with the few children his age in the village and playing with the younger children. By the time he had gathered everything on his list and gotten away from the last lot of little kids who had demanded piggyback rides, Naruto was downright exhausted and retreated to his spot, a small ridge that poked out in front of the waterfall. To his surprise, Miyamoto was already there and seemed to be meditating, his legs folded under him and his eyes closed. Naruto put down his pack and sat down beside his brother, taking up his Indian-style pose and shut his eyes. The pair was silent for a few minutes, before Miyamoto finally broke it. Naruto, I'm not really sure how to say this, but I'll try to be as straightforward as I can, he began without opening his eyes. I won't be joining you in Konoha next year. Naruto's eyes snapped open and he turned to face his brunette brother. What? Miyamoto sighed. I won't be becoming a ninja. I know how much being a ninja means to you, and I don't mean to disappoint you, but I want to live with the monks. They taught me so much when they took me on their pilgrimage. Now just how to fight with a staff, but that all life is precious. A ninja will always be forced to take a human life sometime in their career, and I agree with the monks. No matter their sins, the worst evildoers can always be brought back to the light. And when they can't, it is not the sinners who are at fault, but we who failed to bring them back. That is the way of the monks, and I have come to believe that myself. I will join them when you leave for Konoha, and most likely spend the rest of my life serving them. I truly am sorry if you believe I am abandoning you, Naruto, but this is the path I have chosen for myself. Naruto stared wide-eyed at Miyamoto. First Haku, now him. His own brother was leaving him. How could Naruto forgive him when he was going to be left alone in Konoha to deal with the hatred alone? I can't let those thoughts fill my mind. Kenji told me what happened to pessimistic ninja. They are always the first to die. Miyamoto, he made his choice. I can't have expected him to stick by me his entire life. This is just a lot sooner than I would have liked. It's okay, I guess. You have to follow your own road, and I will follow mine. We'll still stay in contact though, so it's not like I'm losing you, Naruto said with a slightly forced grin that he knew Miyamoto wouldn't notice. Naruto had always been a good liar, for as long as he could remember. The only people who had ever caught it so far were Haruai and Haku. Miyamoto nodded and sighed with relief. I was afraid you'd try to rend my head from my shoulders. I'm glad you understand, Naruto. I think it's about time we started heading back though. With a nod of agreement, the brothers stood up and took their packs, making their way out of the village. Miyamoto carried on whilst Naruto slowed his pace a little, staring up at the afternoon sky. A soft smile spread across his face. Here I come, Konoha. Let's hope you are prepared for me, nay? Chapter 1. The Hidden Leaf. The Great Highway, one of the largest roads in the entire Land of Fire, ran from the capital Tanzakagai, where the daimyo resided, winding around mountains and over rivers, linking with Kanehagakure along the way, and all the way to Port City. The soil had compacted in on itself over the years of use, and become that dark yellowish-brown that signified a well-worn road. Folk from town and country alike used the road, walking, running, or limping to where they needed to go, men, women, and children from all aspects of life. Almost all the traffic on the road traveled by foot. Few people could afford the high price of horses, and only merchants used carts, as the farmers carried their produce in thick woven baskets they carried on their backs. The wealthy or the noble were carted around in palanquins, which were rather ornate boxes that were carried on suspension poles by 2 or 4 men. A group of merchants had stopped along the highway to discuss prices, and their wares were effectively blocking the road. A shadow appeared in the middle of the orange autumn sun, before spiraling and falling back down to earth in front of the merchant blockade. The figure stood tall and frowned at the merchants, who chuckled nervously and hurriedly moved their carts to one side of the road. If one was to ask why the merchants acted so quickly, the most likely answer would be because of his appearance. He had golden blonde, spiky hair that stopped just as his neck met his shoulders, which fell down his forehead just above his eyes. His blue eyes were mirthful, and a set of 3 whisker-like marks ran across each of his cheeks. The boy, who could be no older than 13, was clad in a pair of dark navy blue cargo pants covered in pockets, which were taped around his ankles and ran into a pair of black ninja sandals. On the outside of each thigh he carried a weapon pouch, and a pair of ninja supply pouches sat on each of his hips. His top was a faded gray color, whilst the outside of the sleeves were the same navy blue as his pants. Underneath was a mesh shirt, which was revealed at the neck of his shirt and where his sleeves ended, before his forearm guards began. The forearm guards themselves were 3 metal plates, which were designed to move as his arm did, atop a sleeve of mesh. He has gloves that ended at the first knuckle, with a metal plate across the top. Hanging from his neck was a black necklace, which held a lac stone with a single white scar running across its face. Strapped to his back, held up by a sky blue sash that crossed his front, was a black sheath, home to the ninjato currently resting in it. The ninjato's handle was wrapped in black cotton, revealing the gray ray skin under wrap, and a golden talisman-like object in the middle of the handle, which upon closer inspection was designed to look like a whirlpool. Its tsuba, the hand guard, was made of copper and had been intricately designed with turbulent waves around the edges, as if being moved by a strong wind. Attached to his utility belt, aside from the supply pouches, were a pair of scrolls. Each of them held the same turbulent waves pattern as the ninjato along the top and bottom. The first was marked katana, and the second marked broadsword. Concealed within the depths of his weapons pouches were several kunai knives and shuriken. In his supply pouches, he held a mass of scrolls, ninja tools like ninja wire, smoke bombs, flashbangs, and lock-picking sets, etc., spare kunai and shuriken, and a rebreather he had obtained during a trip to the land of snow. Hidden between the metal slats of his forearm guard were several flat blade-throwing knives and a few more shuriken. Naruto, you really shouldn't scare people like that. It'll give you a bad reputation. The blonde turned his head and pouted at the man that was walking towards up the now cleared highway. He had scraggy brown hair, a few scars and wrinkles across his face, and brown eyes that were sparkling with amusement. The beginnings of a beard were starting to form along his chin and jawline, and he tended to scratch at the growing hairs. Garbed in a simple traveling outfit of loose-fitting dark brown pants and a white shirt with green traveling jacket, he looked like every part the farmer he was. What made people avoid him, though, was the katana strapped to his side and the weapon's holster strapped to his thigh. Also, hanging from his belt, was a rather large, bulging sack which was filled with money. "But it's their fault for blocking the way, Kenji-san," moaned the blonde. Kenji raised a finger to his lips, as if mentally debating the situation, but he shrugged and nodded. "I suppose you're right." Naruto threw out his hand and made a V sign. "Ha! I am always right. Yet another victory for the almighty Uzumaki Naruto." With an amused sigh and a shake of his head, Kenji grabbed his adopted son by the scruff of his collar and started forward towards the great gates that sealed off the east entrance to Konoha. Naruto struggled for several minutes before he finally came to his senses and grumbled under his breath. He raised his free hands into a set of hand seals whilst focusing his chakra. A plume of smoke later and Naruto was walking free and clear of Kenji, leaving the man staring at the log that was now in his hand. Kenji threw the leg in Naruto's direction, wondering how, not if, his son would react to the oncoming danger. To an untrained eye, Naruto's arm would have been a blur, and the log would have seemingly split in two and fell to the ground on its own. However, to a ninja, and more specifically Kenji, Naruto had moved at a fairly average speed. He had sensed the oncoming projectile, drawn his blade and turned half-circle, slicing the log as he turned. After the threat had been sufficiently dismantled, Naruto finished his turn and sheathed his sword, continuing on as if nothing had happened. Kenji couldn't help but nod proudly at Naruto's back. His son was more than ready to become an official ninja. The pair made it to the great green gates of Konoha without any more incidents, amiably chatting when the two Chunin on guard duty stopped them. The first Chunin stepped forward, a bored look on his face, as if he would rather be out fighting some foreign ninja or a band of thugs. "Papers, please," the Chunin droned. Kenji reached into his jacket to retrieve his, and Naruto fished around in one of his pockets. After a few seconds, they both handed their papers over for inspection, and they both his amused smiles when the Chunin's eyes widened at the names on the papers. Takizo Kenji was rather famous in Konoha as the Yondaime Hokage's trusted teammate and confidant, also because he was the next desired leader after the former Yondaime. He had turned down the position for a rural life with his wife, and had never regretted it. Naruto, as the adopted son of Kenji, also had Takizo in his surname, but also carried his first surname of Uzumaki. Officially, he was also the heir to the Namikaze clan as the son of Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime, however the knowledge was not yet public. "Takizo-sama, it is an honor to meet you. And young Naruto, it is good to see you again. You probably don't remember me, but I am Dash. Kotetsu-san, you and Izumo-san used to look after me when Sarutobijiji couldn't. Still a Chunin then?" "Huh," Naruto said, shocking both Kotetsu and Izumo. Kotetsu was the first one to snap out of his daze, and shook his head with a disgruntled moan. "Yup, still a Chunin. To be honest, I'm surprised you remember us." Izumo nodded in agreement. "Yeah, you were only what? 3 when you left." The blonde nodded and grinned cheekily. "I have a really great memory. Photographic, actually." Izumo shook his head and waved the pair on. The Chunin couple stared after them, and Kotetsu couldn't help but grin. "That kid. Heh, I can't wait to see what he grows into." Sarutobi Hiruzen was having one hell of a day. First, he got the psychological reports on the current graduating class from the academy. Most of them were fine, if a little eccentric. What disturbed him were two particular files. The first was Uchiha Sasuke, the sole survivor of the Uchiha massacre, and considered to be the last of the Uchiha, despite his older brother still being alive. Ever since that night, he had steadily gone downhill. Whilst he remained at the top of the academy, he had constantly challenged people to fights, ignored anyone who attempted to befriend him, and even accused the teachers at the academy of holding him back. He was obsessed with getting power so he could avenge his clan and kill his brother. Sarutobi feared that obsession would lead to the young Sasuke doing something drastic in the future. The second report was on the second best kunoichi in the academy, grades-wise anyhow. Haruno Sakura, a pink-haired young girl more obsessed with gaining the attention of Uchiha Sasuke than being a ninja. Subpar chakra levels, subpar taijutsu, average genjutsu, and above-average chakra control, most likely due to her lack of chakra. The psychologist believed that, while she has the potential to become a decent ninja, possibly even a medic in the future, she lacked the necessary drive and determination. Her obsession with the Uchiha child also seemed to be self-destructive, as she seemed willing to do anything for the boy. The psychologist also believed she had some kind of dual personality. Whilst not uncommon amongst veteran ninja, to have one at such a young age signified mental problems. With all of that information, and the assurance from Yumino Irika, the current teacher, Sarutobi had designed the teams according to usual Konoha standards. And it didn't look great. He would be forced to pair Haruno and Uchiha together in order to balance the teams according to their grades, and some no-name child would be their third member due to his extremely poor grades. The team would most likely be absolutely destroyed on their first mission outside the village, but his advisors and Danzo were pressuring him to allow the Uchiha to pass despite his report. He was the last bearer of the infamous Sharingan who was still loyal to Konoha. At least that is what the rest of the village though. Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's older brother and the teenager who had killed his entire clan, had done so on the orders of the Hokage as the entire clan was planning a coup d'etat. Sarutobi rubbed his forehead before he took up his pipe, packing it with his favorite tobacco blend. Taking the box of matches from his desk, he struck one and held it for a few seconds, allowing the sulfur on the tip to burn away before taking the mouthpiece between his lips and holding the flame over the tobacco, moving it in circles while he puffed on it. Once that was done, he tamped down the surface tobacco and lit it once more, taking a long draw on it. He let the smoke swirl around in his mouth for a bit before releasing into the air with a long sigh. Much better. A cough broke him from his relaxation, and he turned and raised an eyebrow at the people before him. A smile slowly spread across his lips and his eyes twinkled with life that had been lost for many years. You know, old man, you really shouldn't smoke so much in the office. It's going to kill one of your ninja when they try to deliver a report. Kenji-kun, you won't deny an old man of his favorite pastime, would you? Sarutobi questioned, his eyebrows rising a little as if he was expecting an answer. Kenji chuckled and a soft laugh echoed from behind him. Sarutobi arched only one eyebrow as he craned his neck to see who was behind Kenji. Naruto stepped around the older man and waved at Sarutobi, a grin on his face and his cerulean eyes sparkling with mischief. You can smoke all you like, I say. Kenji-san does it as well when Haruika-chan isn't around. Naruto poked his tongue at Kenji, who now looked slightly put out.
Sarutobi Jiji.
Sarutobi stared at the boy, taking in his appearance. He was definitely a young ninja, and his attitude was far better than what Sarutobi would have imagined he would have turned out like if he stayed in Konoha. A grandfatherly smile and a come here beckon later. Naruto was around the table and giving the old man a hug. Missed you, old man, Naruto mumbled. He remembered everything from the time he was 1.5, but his most prominent memory was that of his grandfather. He had also visited the Hokage on his 8th birthday when Haruai had come into Konoha, bringing Naruto along. Sarutobi chuckled and patted Naruto on the head. And you, sweet boy, your father has been sending me letters on your progress and I haven't seen you since you were 8. Tell me, what has been happening in the last 4 years? And so Naruto launched into his long story of living on the farm. Everything between the last time he had seen Sarutobi and today, omitting certain details about his Nukenin teachers. Sarutobi laughed, smiled, and nodded sagely at the correct points, listening with rapture to the boy's tale. Naruto always had a gift for gaining people's attention. A flash of a Naruto wearing a bright orange jumpsuit went through his mind when he thought of Naruto getting attention. Sarutobi fought to stop himself from snorting at the image. As if Naruto would ever be caught in a jumpsuit, let alone an orange one. When the tale finally ended, Sarutobi nodded thoughtfully. Maybe Naruto could help with his current problem. He had a good head on his shoulders, he was able to get through to most people, and if Sarutobi guessed right, he could defend himself and others. Yes, Naruto would become the final member of the unbalanced team. But before that, there were still some issues to attend to. If I had known you would be back today, I would have been more prepared. Hold on just a second. The Hokage got up from his seat and walked over to the furthest shelf on the left wall, closest to the window. Moving a few scrolls and books aside, Sarutobi found what he was looking for and made a half-ram seal with his right hand whilst his left hand disappeared into the bookshelf. A soft creak echoed through the office, and the bookshelf started to swing away from the wall, revealing a hidden room. Sarutobi motioned for the pair to come through and made his way inside. The room was about the size of the office, maybe a bit smaller. The walls were lined with shelves which were overflowing with scrolls and books. In the middle of the room was a table which had several items on it that Naruto didn't recognize. Looking around, he saw that not only were there scrolls and books in the shelves, but boxes and chests as well. Kenji, I'm sure you remember this room, but for Naruto, this is the Hokage's personal vault. Anything that relates to the Hokage or future Hokages is stored in here. What we are in here for is... Sarutobi moved over to one of the shelves and slid a rather ornate chest from it. Blowing the dust off the top, he nodded to himself and turned around, showing the pair the chest. This. He handed the box to Naruto and waved them out, shutting the bookcase behind him. A soft glow emanated from where Sarutobi had stuck his hand in before, and the bookshelf sealed itself with a click. Naruto stared at the box, more specifically at the golden plaque along the top. It read Namikaze Naruto. Naruto looked up at the Sandaime, who nodded once, before he moved to open the box. His eyebrow twitched when the lid wouldn't budge, and he scowled at the amused look on both Hiruzen's and Kenji's faces. Lifted the box to eye height, he noticed that where a lock would normally be on a chest was a seal. More specifically, a blood seal, designed by clans long ago for keeping their clan secrets, exactly that, secrets. He had studied them with Jiraiya about 6 months ago. Biting his thumb, Naruto drew blood and swiped it across the seal, before trying his luck at opening the box once more. This time, the lid slid up without a problem, revealing the inside of the chest. The edges were lined in what looked like red silk, and sitting on a cushion was a single scroll bearing the waves and wind design at each end, signifying it as a Namikaze scroll. Naruto slipped the scroll from its resting place, unrolling it with an almost reverence of the object. Within was a map of Konoha, with prominence put into a certain detail. In a small part of forest to the northeast of the village, a house was marking with the Namikaze name next to it. Obviously, it was the Namikaze clan estate, although it seemed considerably smaller than all the other clan compounds within the hidden village. Naruto unrolled more of the scroll to reveal a paragraph of writing and a series of storage seals. The paragraph was merely directions to the house, as the path was well hidden. Underneath each storage seal, though, was a name. The first was his, so he assumed the first held something for him specifically. The second along the line was marked Kenji/Jiraiya. Naruto raised an eyebrow and showed it to Kenji, who shrugged in response. The next along the line was marked Uzumaki, and the final was marked Kazama. Naruto held the scroll out to the Sandaime. Gigi, what is this last name? I don't recognize it at all. Sarutobi glanced down at the name. Ah, the Kazama clan are tied to the Namikaze. They act as keepers, bodyguards, or servants depending on the situation. Kazama Shigeru and his granddaughter are the last remaining Kazama that we are aware of. They both live at the Namikaze household. Naruto nodded. I see. So, when can I check out the house? Sarutobi chucked. Not until you go to the academy. I've already had you enrolled. But you need to get to know the people you will be working with when you become a ninja. The Chunin exam is in a week, and the teams will be announced a fortnight after that. Naruto sighed and pouted. Oh, come on. Do I really have to? I want to check out my new house. Kenji slapped Naruto up the back of his head. Don't be so disrespectful, geez. Your mother would have a fit if she heard that whining from you. The blonde frowned and crossed his arms over his chest. Tisich, I learned how to whine from this man and he is getting up me for it. Naruto ducked another swat aimed at his head and threw his arms up in defeat. Fine, fine, I'll go to the academy. Geez. Chapter 2. Day of Discovery. Cerulean eyes surveyed the outside walls of the famed Ninja Academy of Konoha. Many legends had begun inside these walls, some good and some terrible. To one ninja hopeful in particular, though, it looked like a boring old school that would drain the life out of him faster than any kunai could. With a sigh, Naruto started towards the doors. The only thing he was looking forward to joining the academy was the possibility of making some friends. He had never had any his own age, as he had lived alone with his family for most of his life. Pushing open the red doors, he started through the foyer and towards the stairs that led up to the classrooms. Glancing around as he walked, he noticed a reception desk and several doors that most likely led to small libraries and offices. Taking the stairs 3 at a time, he glanced down at the slip of paper the Hokage had given him. It held the classroom he needed to find, as well as a small note for the instructor, a Chunin named Irika who seemed to be one of the better teachers in the academy. He fiddled with his forearm armor as he walked, looking into the small windows on each door to the classrooms. It was slightly disconcerting, seeing so many kids wanting to be ninja. Half of them probably didn't even know what it truly meant to be a ninja, that it was a lonesome life, filled with chaos and destruction. Sure, it was honorable to serve your village, but sometimes it wasn't worth it. At least, according to Kenji, that's how the life was. Many ninja had quit due to the pressure, and were forced to be subject to the memory removal jutsu of the Konoha ANBU, getting rid of any confidential information they may know of. Naruto looked up from his wondering and found himself in front of the classroom he was supposed to join. Was his mind really far off that he had gone into autopilot? Shaking his head, he sucked in a deep breath and cleared his mind, preparing himself for whatever was on the other side of the door. His hand reached out for the handle, and Naruto steeled himself for what he was sure would be the worst few hours of his life to date. Irika stared at his rather rambunctious class and gave a frustrated sigh. Despite the fact that they all had the potential to pass the Academy's Chunin exam, most of them would fail during their Jounin Sensei's exam. Of the entire class, only the 7 clan heirs would pass without problem. Unfortunately, that left unbalanced numbers, so unless one of the clanless really stepped up their game, one of the heirs would be forced to return to the academy for another year or enter the standard program. His brown eyes wandered over each and every one of the heirs, and he couldn't help but be proud. Despite their odd attitudes, they were all strong, ready to join the ranks of the Konoha elite. A paper plane floated above his head, and Irika's eye started to twitch. Time to get the class back under control. They had had their fun for the day. Inhaling deeply, Irika readied to use his demon head jutsu when the door slowly opened. The entire room's attention was suddenly on the door. A sandal-covered foot stepped through, followed by a leg that held a weapons pouch. Slowly, the form of a boy the same age as the rest of the class appeared through the door, a shy grin on his face. Irika's eyes widened before they narrowed. He recognized this child. It was the whisker marks that gave him away. It was the Jinchuriki that held the Kyuubi no Yoko, Uzumaki Naruto. What the hell is he doing here? Naruto strolled across the room and handed the note to Irika. The Chunin looked it over and almost howled in annoyance. This brat would be part of his class for the rest of the week and then take the exams. What the hell was the Hokage thinking? What the hell is that old man thinking? Naruto thought. This teacher obviously hates me, he must know the truth about the Kyuubi. Gah! This was a bad idea.
R.E.
Naruto trailed off, not quite sure what to say. Irika stared at him for a moment before handing the note back to the blonde. Introduce yourself to the class, and then take a seat. There is a spare next to Sasuke. Irika motioned with his finger. Nodding, Naruto faced the class and lowered into a bow. Hello. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. It is nice to meet you all. Immediately whispers burst out between the students. Girls were claimed he was almost as hot as Sasuke, whilst the boys were discussing the ninjato on his back and the slats of metal atop his forearms. With a mental groan, Naruto made his way up to the third row where Sasuke was sitting. Only Iruka noticed that he made absolutely no noise as he walked, causing the Chunin's eyebrows to rise in curiosity. Naruto slipped into the seat next to the raven-haired Uchiha heir and smiled at the boy. "Nice to meet you, Sasuke, right?" Sasuke just grunted and turned away, staring out the window with a brooding look on his face. Naruto sighed and turned back to face Iruka, who was starting his lecture on the art of precision kunai throwing. Judging by the groans that came from the students, this was a subject that had already been covered before, and Naruto already knew about it as well. Resting his cheek in his upturned palm, Naruto settled in for what he knew was going to be a long day. Iruka looked around the classroom, and upon seeing that most of his students were half asleep, if not already there, he decided it would be best to cut his lecture off at that point. Checking the clock that hung above the door using his peripherals, Iruka figured it was time to let the monkeys out for some exercise. The moment the words fell out of his mouth, the entire class bolted for the door except one certain blonde. Naruto watched the mob charge for the door with wide eyes. The entire class was insane. Looking back to Iruka, he saw his sensei smirk before motioning towards the door with his left hand. Nodding, Naruto hopped up and vaulted over the desk, hurtling towards the ground floor. Iruka moved forward with concern. He may hate the demon, but so far this kid had been nothing but polite, and he didn't want the sandame on his ass for letting Naruto break his own neck. To his surprise, Naruto landed in a sort of skid, before stretching up to his full height of roughly 5 feet 5 inches and smirked at Iruka. "Come on then, I assume you want to go outside as much as the rest of the children," Iruka said. Naruto lips parted as his smirk turned to a grin, and Iruka's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Naruto's canine teeth. They were as long and as sharp as Kiba's, and that boy was from the Inuzuka clan, who were famous for having dog-like traits. Shaking his head, Iruka shooed Naruto out the door, following closely behind. He observed the blonde from behind as Naruto made his way towards the staircase, wondering if his opinion of this child was completely wrong. Naruto jogged through the foyer, ignoring Iruka's scalding about running indoors, and burst through the entrance doors into the sun. Feeling the warmth of his face, Naruto couldn't help but smile contentedly. He loved the feeling the sun brought him. It made him think of home, doing his chores around the farm. An easier life where Miyamoto was still at his side and Haku would still be around. He ducked a swing from Iruka's open hand and jogged alongside the teacher to where the rest of the class had gathered. Leaving Iruka, Naruto stepped into the group and stopped beside a boy with a hairstyle reminiscent of a pineapple, and a boy that looked like he ate nonstop. And if Naruto went by the packet of crisps in his hand, the blonde's theory was probably right. "All right, class," Iruka began. "Run 2 laps around the yard and then go through your stretches. We'll do some sparring after you are all warmed up." A chorus of hiss rang through the yard before the large group separated into smaller ones. Sasuke was by himself towards the front, his fangirls trailing behind him. A few random classmates spread out over the edge of the yard, followed by a group of boys towards the back. Naruto was with the group of boys at the back, and he tried to make conversation with the fellow boys in his class. After all, the entire reason for his attending the academy was to get to know his future comrades. "Hi there," he said towards the pineapple-haired boy. "So who are the people I should get to know around here? I'm Uzumaki Naruto, in case you forgot." Said boy looked at Naruto with a strange, inquisitive look. "Nara Shikamaru, and it's kind of hard to forget a name like Naruto." Naruto grinned. "I hope you won't turn out to be as troublesome as the other blonde in this class. But I suppose the people you want to get to know is the group we are with right now and maybe Hinata. Well, that's a Kimichi Chuji, he is Aburame Shino, and the rather wild-looking one is Inuzuka Kiba." Shikamaru pointed to each of the boys as he introduced them. Chuji smiled and waved at Naruto. Shino merely nodded and Kiba turned and started to run backwards, grinning at the blonde. The group started a conversation on likes and dislikes, trying to get to know one another better. Shikamaru loved shogi much more than Naruto did, and Naruto enjoyed that game quite a lot. The Nara also played any other board game that required strategy and thinking. Chuji was Shikamaru's best friend, and the pair often watched clouds together. Shino was, for the most part, completely silent. He apparently enjoyed silence and stillness, as it gave him more opportunities to find bugs and other creepy crawlies. Kiba was loud, brash, and loved a good laugh. He was also the second-best taijutsu fighter in the academy, shortly after Sasuke. Before they realized it, the group had finished their laps and gone through their stretches. Naruto was looking forward to this part of the day. The only way to determine a person's true character was by how they fought. The best way to judge them was to fight them, but watching from the sidelines also gave valuable insight. The only people he was overly worried about were Kiba and Sasuke. They were both top of the class in taijutsu, and Naruto's was only average. He had spent more time working on his sword styles and techniques than on the martial arts. Naruto sat with Shikamaru and Chuji on the stone benches that lined the far side of the outdoor arena. The ground was solid dirt covered in a layer of soft grass as to prevent too bad of an injury, but at the same time simulate a potential fight in the field. White lines painted on the grass marked the edges of the arena, and Irika explained that being forced out of the arena was considered as a fall. Okay, standard rules. For those who have forgotten, taijutsu only. No ninjutsu or genjutsu. The first to 2 falls is the loser, the Chunin explained. After that was done with, Irika started to call out names of those who were evenly matched in terms of taijutsu. The only one he wasn't sure about was Naruto, having never seen him fight. Naruto watched Shino and Shikamaru fight with interest. Shino's moves wasted no energy, and were brutally efficient whilst Shikamaru waited for Shino to make a move, and then reacted accordingly. It was fascinating to watch, something similar to a game of live shogi. Kiba's and Chuji's fight was an all-out brawl, Chuji using his family taijutsu style and throwing his weight behind his punches, and Kiba's natural dog fighting style was something terrifying to watch. Chuji had several gashes along his arms and face when the pair was finished, but Kiba was sporting a brand new shiner, a busted lip, and was limping slightly. Despite their state, each of the ninja bowed to each other at the end and helped one another back to the stands, grinning the entire time. Irika looked across the stands and shrugged when he noticed something. Okay. The final 2 are Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. Sasuke smirked and walked down to the arena with an aura of complete and total arrogance. And if the tales Naruto had heard were true, that arrogance as well founded. Naruto gulped and slowly made his way down to the arena as well. As he walked, he unclipped his forearm holsters and took off his gloves, removing the metal on his arms that could cause extra damage. He slipped his ninjato and sash off as well, and wrapped the guards and gloves in the sash, leaving them with Irika. Said brunette stared at the pair who were now facing each other in the arena. Begin! Naruto was forced to backpedal away from Sasuke, who charged forward with speed that almost matched Naruto's. He wasn't expecting a full frontal assault from a ninja, especially one that was rumored to be as good as Sasuke. Ducking a backhand swing aimed at his temple, Naruto moved into a sweep kick that Sasuke managed to jump over. Naruto corkscrewed up. His hand balled into a tight fist and aimed an uppercut at the Uchiha's jaw. Said boy bent his neck back a bit, narrowly avoiding the punch, and kicked off Naruto's forearm, moving back across the arena. Naruto dashed forward, zigzagging left to right, planning his next move. Sasuke smirked and fell into his clan's taijutsu stance, and Naruto noticed a major flaw. The stance left so many openings it wasn't funny. Though from what he had heard from Kenji about the Uchiha, the clan relied on their Sharingan rather heavily when it came to taijutsu fighting. The ability to predict an opponent's moves would make up for any openings in their defense. Naruto lowered himself closer to the ground, lowering his center of gravity, and began to pick up speed. 3 paces, 2 paces, 1 pace. There. Naruto twisted on his foot and seemingly tripped himself, moving into a horizontal spin. Sasuke's smirk grew wider, and Naruto couldn't help but grin. Naruto finished the first 180 degrees of the rotation and swung his leg out, slamming it down onto the crown of Sasuke's head. The Uchiha dropped like a stone, a shocked cry erupting from his lips. Naruto landed in a crouch behind Sasuke and grinned. Irika nodded and raised a finger on his left hand. 1 fall to Naruto. Sasuke growled and jumped back onto his feet, charging Naruto like an enraged animal. Naruto's right foot slid backwards, and he bent his knees, preparing for the coming onslaught. Just as Sasuke's came within range, He jumped and threw both his legs out in front of him in a drop kick. Cerulean eyes widened as Naruto took the kick straight to his face, sending his neck snapping backwards with frightening velocity. The rest of the blonde's body followed, but Naruto managed to keep hold of his senses and land in a handstand in time to avoid a fall. What he wasn't expecting was Sasuke to be already on the ground and sweep his hands from under him, sending Naruto tumbling onto the grass. One fall to Sasuke. The two boys and moved back onto their feet, circling each other as they went around the arena. Naruto could feel the eyes of the entire class on the fight, more specifically on him. Even Sasuke's fangirls were watching him. Sucking in a deep breath, his nostrils flared for a moment, and that was when all hell broke loose. The boys charged each other, throwing precisely aimed punches and kicks, blocking, evading, and parrying one another. Naruto could feel the bruises starting to form around his ribs, as well as the tooth that had been knocked slightly loose. Naruto doubled back away from Sasuke and felt the tooth with his tongue. Phew, just a baby one, Naruto thought. Naruto slapped a backhand to the side and spiraled in towards Sasuke's chest. Bringing his elbow backwards, he felt it slam into Sasuke's chest and couldn't help but grin. That had to have hurt. He moved away quickly, but not fast enough to avoid a rising kick to his chin. Naruto felt his teeth pierce his tongue and cried out, blood flying from his mouth. Seeing Sasuke's smirk coming back, Naruto snarled and swung his legs up, forcing himself to spin, and his feet collided with Sasuke's own chin. The boys both crashed to the ground with rather resounding thumps. Iruka stared at the two boys and chuckled, waving his hands across each other. Double fall. It's a draw. Naruto was the first to get back onto his feet. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the grass, staining the lush greenery with the crimson red. Walking over to Sasuke, the blonde grinned and held out his hand towards his opponent. That was a good match, nay? Sasuke stared at the hand, but didn't glare and didn't sneer. He merely stood up of his own accord and grunted what Naruto figured was agreement. The grin on Naruto's face grew brighter, and the young Uchiha shook his head. Iruka called the students across and sent the overly injured ones to see the academy medic. Naruto thanked the man gratefully. His tongue was starting to get really sore. A shadowed figure sat hunched over a desk in a dankly lit room. There were a few Gothic-style torch holders lining the walls, and the torches weren't burning, that brightly signifying how long they had been ablaze. The figure only had his left eye showing, as his forehead and right eye were covered in bandages. A cross-shaped scar marred his chin, and the wrinkles that were apparent on the visible part of his face signified he was getting on in his years. A flicker of the light in the room, nothing overtly obvious but something that shouldn't have happened, drew the man's attention away from the mission report he was reading. His single eye trailed over to a pair of Konoha ANBU lookalikes. The only difference between these men and the actual ANBU was the fact that their armor was matte black instead of the gray of the ANBU. Their swords were also shorter and had no tip. Well? The man questioned. The research has come along as quickly as we expected it. Our top analysts and creators are working on the jutsu as we speak, the first of the two lookalikes said. The scarred man nodded. Good. And how long will it take? Even with the information Orochimaru left behind, the second figure began, it will likely take at the very least 6 months. The man stood up from his desk, revealing his right arm hanging uselessly in a sling and a cane in his left hand. 6 months, just in time for the Chunin exams. Be sure that Shirsue's body is recovered and prepared before then. He waited for the pair to nod before he continued. What news of the squad tracking Orochimaru? At last report, they mentioned Orochimaru was planning on meeting with the Kazekage. For what reason, they weren't sure. I see. If that is all, return to your assignments. The two figures nodded as they knelt on one knee.
Hi, Dando-sama.
A snick echoed through the forest, followed by a lightning-fast flash of light. Several overgrown branches fell cleanly from their trees, falling to the forest floor with a heavy thump. Naruto spun his ninjato around in his right hand, his left clutching the scroll that held his new home's location. He hadn't waited for Kenji and Sarutobi after the academy ended for the day, and ran ahead to the small patch of forestry in an attempt to scope out his clan house. Utilizing the now cleared path, Naruto shot up through the trees, bouncing from one to another to gain speed. When he finally broke through the canopy, he had to shield his eyes from the sudden onslaught of the bright sun. He blinked a few times, trying to clear the patches of white in his vision before he took to surveying his surroundings. He was definitely in the right patch of forest. His map and geography skills confirmed that. The instructions that had come with the map were obviously old, as the path it had mentioned had disappeared. If that was the case, how on earth did the two Kazama living on the estate get out of the forest? His blue eyes trailed across the treetops before they flicked back to a patch where the trees seemed darker than the others around them. Making sure he applied chakra to his feet, Naruto bound across the canopy, being careful to only step on actual branches and not just twigs. They wouldn't be able to hold his weight. As he got closer to the darker patch of trees, he realized that they weren't actually darker, just further away than the rest of the trees. If that was the case, there had to be a clearing just before them, right? Naruto's chakra flared briefly when he got too excited and lost control. The sudden burst was timed just as he went to jump to another treetop, and it sent the boy flying up and forward. A panicked yell erupted from Naruto as he tried to regain control of his body, but the wind was whipping at him as if it were a cat o' nine tails. As he spun, he noticed that this was definitely the spot, as there was a rather large house just below him. He threw his ninjato with as much force as he could towards the ground. His scroll wrapped around the hilt, and quickly made a cross-shaped seal. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," the blonde crowed. In a cloud of smoke, a doppelganger appeared in front of him and Naruto latched onto its shoulders. The momentum transferred from the original to the clone and they were both sent forward. Naruto, however, used the solid body as a springboard and launched himself towards the clearing. Just as he came into range of the ground, Naruto curved his spine and spun into a standing position, applying chakra to his legs and feet. Large chunks of earth were sent flying from the impact, and a ring of dust flew out from the newly formed crater. Naruto glanced back up at the sky in time to see his clone dispel in a cloud of smoke, and the blonde couldn't help but grin. Well, that was fun. Naruto brushed the dust that had clung to his pants and shirt before climbing out of the crater and walked across to where his sword had been impaled into the ground. Naruto took the scroll from its handle and wrapped it up before slipping it into a hidden pocket on the inside of his shirt. Naruto grabbed the sword and tugged. It slid from the earth with relative ease, and Naruto couldn't help but frown when he saw the state of the blade. It would take a while to clean and sharpen and back to its normal state, but that was what he got for being brash. Reaching into one of his pockets, he plucked a cloth from it that vaguely smelt of cloves and carefully ran it along the blade, cleaning off the dust and earth that had clung to it. He swung in a few times, making sure everything was still intact, before he sheathed the blade over his shoulder. He would take the time later to go over the entire sword piece by piece, but right now he had a house to explore. He turned around and started to really take in the details of the Namikaze estate. The first thing he noticed was that, from the outside, it seemed a lot smaller than the other clan compounds around Konoha. The Uchiha pretty much had their own town within the village when they were still alive. The building sat on land for the most part, but there were several sections that sat atop the waterways that run about the clearing. The house itself was designed according to more traditional standards, at least on the outside. A dark brown wooden frame with pale yellow walls that had obviously been painted made up the main house, with near black-brown tiles lining the roofs. The entrance to the building was more modern in design, being hardwood with a modern door. Naruto noticed a cobblestone path that leads straight to the door, lined on either side in orange-brown bricks that every now and then had a red lantern atop it. Deciding to leave the house exploration for later, he followed the path south from the house, wondering how the hell he didn't notice it coming in. The path wove around trees and the occasional hill, and he went down a set of steps, until it came to a sort of valley between two hills. Either side of the path was lined by sakura trees. Naruto walked down the path and followed the curve around to the left. So that's why I couldn't find it. The directions said that the path began on the east side of the forest. This is heading west. The path reached a wooden red arching bridge that crossed over a koi pond, before the end of the trail disappeared into trees again. Naruto slipped through the trees to find he was free from the forest, and surprisingly close to a ninja training grounds. This side of the forest had a rather large iron gate running down it, and Naruto wondered why there was no gate on the other side. Shrugging, he turned back and launched himself up into the trees. It was time to check out the house. Naruto dropped down onto the stone path in the clearing and followed it over to the door. He ran his finger around the door lock and frowned. He needed a key. Surely the yondaime wouldn't have given him a house and forgotten the key. Reaching into his hidden pocket, he slid the scroll from within and unrolled it across his forearms. Rereading the directions, there was nothing mentioned about a key. Moving across to the storage seals, he hummed in interest before he swiped his thumb over the seal marked Namikaze. He felt his chakra drain just a little bit, and in a cloud of smoke a set of keys appeared. Naruto snatched the keys up and wrapped the scroll up before sliding it into his pocket once more. He went through the keys until he found a rather old-looking one that fit the lock. Naruto was shocked to see that once he twisted it, several seals that had previously been invisible lit up brightly along the walls and door. After a moment, they faded back into nothingness and Naruto figured they must have been security seals of some kind. He would have to ask Jiraiya next time he saw him. The blonde pushed open the door and stepped into the small entryway, which had a small cupboard pushed up against the wall and was blocked from the main house by a sliding door. Naruto toed off his sandals and pushed them to the side opposite the cabinet and stepped up onto the raised floor of the house. Naruto wriggled his toes on top of the tatami flooring, woven straw mats that lined the floor, and almost giggled at the ticklish feeling. He turned full circle, taking in the room with curious eyes. For the most part, it seemed traditional aside from the modern lighting in the ceiling. There were two fusuma, sliding panels, which acted as doors at the far end and the wall on the left of the room. What drew Naruto's attention, however, was the slight alcove in the right wall. At either end were two bonsais, each looked well-maintained, followed by an empty space and then two sets of 3-pillar candles. The candles framed the bottom of a wall hanging, which had a circle at the top which held the Namikaze symbol of turbulent waves, and also had waves running across the bottom of it. Written between the two images was, "Of waves and wind." Naruto couldn't help but grin. It was a Namikaze wall hanging. He traced the outline of the waves on the circle at the top before he turned to continue his exploration. He moved over to the left fusuma, the one that was across from him, and studied the painting on it. It was a cliff looking out towards the sea. In the background were a few birds, and what looked like a rainbow but was too wavy and wasn't the right colors. It was predominantly an almost neon green, with softer shades towards the top. Sliding it along the runners, Naruto was soon staring into a long hallway. The wall on his right side had several sliding doors before it turned into a corner. The left side was a simple wall that went all the way along until it too turned into a corner. Naruto walked up to the first set of doors and slid it open. The room was a modern kitchen with a refrigerator, stove, dishwasher, and even a trash compactor. There were several cupboards attached to the walls, which Naruto assumed held the dinnerware and cutlery, and countertops all along the right wall. A small wooden door just before the left wall joined with the far wall opened into a pantry. The left wall itself was left bare, but there was an opening that went into the next room. Naruto went through and found himself in a dining room that could easily seat at least 20 people. At the moment, though, only one small table was set up which could seat around 6 to 8. Naruto went back into the hallway, doubling back through the kitchen to shut the sliding doors, and made his way to the third room. The fusuma opened to reveal a room that Naruto recognized would be used for tea ceremonies. Sliding the door shut again, Naruto took the corner and was again in another long hallway. This one had two fusuma along the right wall, and a shoji sliding door was towards the middle of the left wall. Light filtered through the grid-like wooden framework, making a crisscross pattern on the tatami ahead. It obviously opened to the outside of the house and not another room, but Naruto would leave that until he explored the first two rooms. He slid open the first set of doors, which were left blank of any design, and immediately broke out into a wide grin. It was a dojo. Not just any dojo either, a fully equipped ninja dojo. Seals lined the walls to prevent damage from any jutsu below B rank, and would probably act as steel-reinforced concrete when hit by a stray weapon. Racks along the walls housed weapons from a standard katana, to the sickle and scythe, and even to nunchakus and other blunt instruments. The floor was lined with tatami again, but there was an elevated stage in the middle of the room that was simple hardwood. Naruto traced his fingers along the edge of the stage and noticed several seals grafted into the wood itself and not just painted. He really needed to have Jiraiya come and take a look at this house, because these seals were too advanced for him to read properly. He made his way to the other room, which revealed a set of stairs going up to the next floor and a door, similar to the one that barred entry to the house. Naruto shuffled through the keys and found the one that fit, but decided to leave it. It was obviously locked up better than the rest of the house for a reason. He looked towards the shoji screen, but made the decision to leave that until he had explored the rest of the house. He made his way around into the final hallway, as this one ended in a wall, and had to walk halfway down to get to the first room. Well, the first door really led to the toilet, but that didn't count. It shouldn't be classed as a room. The room was a study, several bookshelves lining the walls with different little decorative pieces. Naruto walked over to the kotatsu and stared at the photo that sat atop it. It was of a tall man, with cerulean eyes and long blonde, spiky hair. He was dressed in the standard Konoha Jounin uniform plus a long white coat, and had his arm wrapped around the shoulders of a shorter woman. The woman took Naruto's breath away, long flowing red hair and sparkling green eyes. One of her hands was holding onto the man's and the other was resting on her sizable belly. Naruto traced the photo with a feather-light touch, tears creeping into his eyes. "Tusen, Ka-chan. She is really beautiful, isn't she?" A familiar voice sounded from behind Naruto. The blonde said nothing, but nodded in agreement. He felt a heavy hand clasp his shoulder, giving a squeeze. The steady breathing of the man behind him helped Naruto calm down, and he smiled at the picture. "You are so much like her, Naruto. She would have been truly proud of you, they both would have." Naruto nodded again. "I know. Hey, how come you don't have any photos of her?" Kushina hated cameras. It took Minato almost a month to get her to agree to that photo, and even then he had to bribe her with as much salt ramen as she wanted for a week. "Honestly, I think that's where you got your addiction to it from. She ate so much ramen when she was pregnant with you, she almost sent old Tsuchi-san into retirement," Kenji explained with a chuckle. Naruto turned and finally looked at Kenji. He had obviously been running at a fast pace because his hair had been pushed back and was almost spiky. He grinned up at his father's best friend when he suddenly realized that his sword was missing. "Where is Hizui?" "Hizui? Oh, I left it with an old friend of mine. I've been neglecting it ever since I retired, so I figured that while I was here, may as well get it touched up a bit. Now, do you want to keep exploring or call it a day?" Naruto looked at the brunette as if he was crazy. Kenji chuckled and waved his arms towards the door rather extravagantly. Naruto nodded to himself and left the study, moving up to the last room of the hallway. It slid open to reveal a rather huge bathroom. The side closest to the door had a bathtub, shower, sink and mirror, everything a modern bathroom should have. And then taking up the other half of the bathroom was an onsen, a hot spring bath, designed to look like it was still in the outdoors. Kenji grinned and would have immediately gotten ready for a bath if it wasn't for the fact Naruto still wanted to explore. Naruto ignored Kenji whining about the beautiful onsen and dragged the older man back to the staircase. He went up and found the entire second floor was bedrooms. 1 master and 4 normal, each with a walk-in wardrobe and a different design on the fusuma. There was also another toilet close to the staircase. The pair wound their way back down to the staircase, and Naruto frowned. Either he found out what was behind the locked door or he went outside for a bit. He made to ask Kenji's opinion but found the older man already opening the shoji that led outside. Naruto came out and found himself on a rather large veranda, which connected to a long series of steps that led out to a lake. Naruto ignored all the desk furniture and started down the steps, taking in the beautiful autumn scenery and the large shiny koi dancing just under the surface of the water. Naruto's eyes trailed over to a waterfall that ran down from a gap that started on the other side of the house. His gaze shifted to the small house that stood next to the main compound, the two connected by a red arching bridge over a pond. "This all belongs to you now, Naruto. The entire forest is the property of the Namikaze, and you are the sole heir," Kenji explained. "When you reach 17 or gain the rank of Chunin, you will become the Namikaze clan head. Until then, you are the Namikaze heir. Sarutobi wanted me to explain that to you." Naruto stared across at the fading sun, its dark rays glittering across the surface of the water. He smiled softly, his muscles relaxing as he drank in the sight. This was his home now, and the locked room would have to wait until tomorrow. He wanted ramen. Chapter 3. Trouble at the exam. Rushing water sounded in the oversized bathroom, a constant scrubbing echoing off the walls. Naruto spat the minty froth in his mouth down the drain and proceeded to rinse his mouth out. Grinning into the mirror, he ran his tongue down his right elongated canine and almost cut it on the tip. He grabbed his mesh top and pulled over his head, shuffling it around a bit to get comfortable before he tugged on his shirt. "Exams today," he whispered, picking up his necklace. He ran his finger along the scar before he slipped it around his neck and raised it to his lips. "Wish me luck, Nisan." Naruto silently padded out of the room and into the hallway, winding around until he got back to the entrance. Instead of heading out, he walked over to the fusuma opposite the exit and slid it open. He walked into a room that led out through a shoji to the Kazama house and had several shelves and cupboards. The shelves held his normal gear, whilst the cupboards housed pre-prepped mission packs that had different things depending on the level of mission. He grabbed his weapon holsters and ninja packs, but decided to forego his forearm armor. His fingers brushed the sheath of his ninjato and the 2 scrolls that lay next to it, but he left the room without picking any of them up. The blonde waved to Shigeru, the old man who was the head of the Kazama, and giggled when his big bushy eyebrows waggled in acknowledgement. The old man was a bit of a jokester, something that Naruto appreciated as a prankster himself, but was very respectful of the Namikaze name. He assisted in Naruto's delivery and had also helped in Minato's birth as well, acting as the former Hokage's favorite uncle rather than servant. He followed the path, enjoying the scenery not for the first time that week. He had taken to morning and evening walks before he ran laps around Konoha, and had both Chuji and Shikamaru around on occasion to play shogi or just watch clouds from the boardwalk over the lake. He had become fast friends with the two as well as Kiba, who had become unofficial sparring partner, and Shino, who enjoyed the peace and quiet of the forest. Naruto's chattiness when he opened up to people evened out with Shino's silence, and the pair had surprisingly intelligent conversations for 12-year-olds. Naruto broke through the line of trees and jumped the large fence, not bothering to unlock it and go through the gate. He strolled along the streets, waving to the few people he had met during his short week in Konoha. Old man Ichiraku and his daughter Ayam, the local blacksmith for ninja weapons, Higurashi Tenma, and his adopted daughter Tenten, to name a few. Noticing a large crowd ahead, Naruto's eyes trailed over all the possible escapes. He got anxious around crowds, especially in Konoha. Jumping up onto a nearby stall roof, he watched the goings-on from his vantage point and was shocked at what he saw. Some fat, obviously wealthy, merchant was whipping a pair of street urchins. Blood poured from their arms, chests and faces, and if Naruto was right, one of them was a young girl. Naruto's normally mirthful eyes hardened to the point they were a cold near gray in color, and his chakra flared. A deep rumble came from the back of his throat and he bared his teeth, preparing to jump. The menacing growl echoed across the crowd, and despite the fact that they were all civilians, they all felt the overwhelming chakra forcing down on them. The tiles underfoot shattered as he took off, blurring in and out of vision slightly at the sheer force of the launch. He slammed fist first into the merchant's stomach, sending him flying back into his stall with a resounding crash. Naruto was hunched over when the merchant finally got his breath back and had the strength to look up. The blonde's head slowly turned up, revealing the most horrific sight the merchant had seen in his greedy life. Pure, unadulterated malice flooded a pair of eyes that were flickering between steely blue and blood red, long canines that seemed to drip with venom, and 3 long whisker marks that were steadily getting deeper.
Dédé Demon.
"It's a demon! Help me!" Naruto took a lone step forward, and the entire crowd took a step back. The blonde slowly raised his hand up until his arm was completely horizontal, a single clawed finger pointing at the merchant. In a deep, growling but steady voice, the blonde spoke. "You are the demon here, filthy scum. Trash like you shouldn't be allowed to live beating on little kids. I should rip your damn arms off, so you can never whip another person again." Naruto's fingers slowly raised, one by one, until they were all bent slightly inwards, the claws almost touching one another. Cocking his arm back, Naruto shot forward again, a loud roar tearing its way from his throat. The crowd's blood ran cold as Naruto finally reached his mark, his arm swinging down towards the man's left shoulder. A blast of wind rocked the area, dust and leaves flying up and obscuring the scene from the villagers. When the dust cleared a few seconds later, the crowd was shocked at what they saw. A brown-haired man wearing something that looked like a black and gold kimono was standing slightly in front of the enraged blonde, a katana in a jade sheath across Naruto's chest. Standing behind Naruto, holding onto the arm that was about to tear off the unlucky merchant's arm and his other hand hooked under Naruto's other shoulder, was a masked Konoha Jounin. His slanted gray hair and Hittite-covered eye standing out from the other Konoha shinobi that suddenly appeared either from rooftops and seemingly out of thin air. Kenji's dark brown eyes smoldered with anger towards the entire situation, but he reined it back in. He had an aggravated son to deal with. Naruto, you need to calm down. What does killing this man achieve in the long run? It'll show that Konoha doesn't stand for this kind of crap. Why the fuck did you stop me? Old man, those kids deserve justice. This isn't justice, Naruto, Kenji barked. This is revenge. He will suffer the consequences of his actions, trust me. But it will happen the right way through the Hokage. Have faith in Konoha, son. Naruto snarled at Kenji and tried to break the grip the silver-haired man had him in. The Jounin winced when he felt the sheer strength of the child, but didn't let go. The blonde roared and his eyes went completely red, his pupils becoming black vertical slits. Kenji swore under his breath and twirled his katana so he was holding it in a backhand grip. He slammed the pommel into Naruto's forehead, causing a sharp burst of blue light to erupt from both the end of the sword and the boy's head. Naruto's eyes faded back to their normal cerulean before his body slackened and slumped into the Jounin holding him. Kakashi, Kenji began. Can you please take him to the Hokage? Kakashi nodded and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Kenji pointed at two Chunin he recognized from the gates a week ago. You too. Take those children to the hospital now. The pair nodded and picked up the children before taking to the rooftops. Thank you, kind sir. Thank you for saving me from that demon. The merchant trailed off when he saw Kenji's face. The swordsman picked up the fat merchant with a single hand, holding him by the scruff of his collar, his feet dangling above the ground. I didn't save you. I saved my son. You will be meeting with a good friend of mine. Her name is Anko. Perhaps you've heard of her. The merchant whimpered. How long will he be out? Sarutobi questioned. Another half hour at most, but I wouldn't be surprised if he wakes up sooner. He is growing resistant to this seal, Kenji replied. He brushed the blonde locks away from his son's closed eyes and sighed. I can't be there when he is on a mission, Sarutobi. He needs a sensei that both Jiraiya and I can trust, and one with knowledge of seals. Sarutobi nodded and looked out the window overlooking Konoha. Minato used to say, the fire's shadow illuminates the village. How is it then that I have lost touch with my village to the point where I don't even know when the people I try so hard to protect are being seriously injured? Kenji glanced across to his mentor's mentor and shrugged. You can't be everywhere at once, old man. You can't know everything that happens, especially when you have to look after both the civilians and control the shinobi corps. When someone spends as much time as you do cooped up in his office with nothing but paperwork, your skills are bound to be slipping as well, no offense. Jiraiya and Tsunade tried to tell you to reform how the village is run, as did both Minato and I. Minato would have, but he died too shortly into his reign. It is not too late to make those changes, Hiruzen. The Hokage nodded once more, seriously considering what Kenji had said. Of all the people he knew, he truly relied on three for advice. The first was his only pupil that didn't hate him to the point of leaving the village, Jiraiya. The second was once Jiraiya's pupil, Namikaze Minato. The third was the man standing in front of him. A man who was wise beyond his years and willing to tell things as they were. The man who should have taken the position of Hokage after Minato's death, Takizo Kenji. Don't tell me you are thinking about trying to make me Hokage again. It ain't gonna happen, old man, Kenji said with a grin. Sarutobi shook his head in the negative. Just thinking in general, I am going to need help making these changes. Will you be willing to stay in Konoha for a while to help me out? I know you don't want my hat, but you could easily take the place of one of my current advisors. Kenji's brown eyebrow raised in thought. That wasn't actually a bad idea. He would be able to keep a closer eye on Naruto, and at the same time he would be able to reinforce the ideals he, Minato, and even Jiraiya had for the village. It might even convince Tsunade to come back. But it wasn't up to him really. You'll have to give me a week or two before I decide. There is the farm to think about, Miyamoto, and most importantly Haruai-chan's decision. Ultimately, if she says she doesn't want to live in Konoha, I will stick by her. Of course, the old Hokage agreed. Kenji walked up and clapped the old man on the back. You know, if you want the rest of the village to accept these changes, you can't afford to be the old man anymore. You need to once again take up your place as the god of shinobi, the professor who knows every jutsu within the walls of Konoha and then some. A croaky question came from across the room. Who knows every jutsu in Konoha? Certainly not you, foolish boy. What were you thinking back there? Naruto shook his head, trying to clear the haze that had settled across his mind. Slowly but surely the day's previous events came back to him. Right up to Kenji activating the suppressor seal on the end of Hisui. He glanced down at his hand and noticed his nails back to normal, but his mind superimposed the clawed hand over it. Naruto clenched his fist tightly in an attempt to destroy the image. Why did it happen, Tusan? Why now? Why today of all possible days? Shouldn't Jiraiya's tinkering have stopped that chakra? The village will know who I am soon enough, if they hadn't already figured it out. Kenji stared at his best friend's son with a mixture of sympathy-sorrow. It wasn't fair that such a young boy had to shoulder such a heavy burden. It's up to you, Naruto. You haven't become an official ninja yet, we can still leave. Naruto's gaze flickered over to Sarutobi. The old man had a look of disappointment but acceptance, as if he knew Naruto would say he wanted to leave. He looked back towards Kenji and found his face a blank slate. The blonde frowned and closed his eyes, falling easily into that state of meditation he found so relaxing. He weighed the pros and cons of staying. He had been training to be a ninja his entire life. It was the only thing he knew. However, dealing with an entire village who despised your very existence seemed far too great a burden to bear. The image of the fourth slipped into his mind, along with his mother, Kushina. He imagined them staring proudly at him, supporting whatever decision he made. A long, slow breath escaped Naruto's slightly parted lips as his eyes opened. I'll stay. I know nothing outside of being a ninja, and shinobi blood runs through my veins. It seems that even if I didn't want to be a ninja, I am forced to it. Sarutobi's face brightened considerably, however Kenji merely nodded. The blank look still in place. Then you best be off, Kenji started. Your exams start in 2 minutes. Before either of the men could blink, there was a blur of yellow and then nothing, only the suddenly open window banging against the outside wall. Kenji shut his eyes and frowned. It was going to be a long few weeks. Uzumaki Naruto? Irika looked around at the graduating class, surprised that the blonde wasn't there. Normally Naruto was early for everything, generally paid attention and had an actual sense of humor, unlike most of the rest of the class. In Irika's eyes, he had quickly risen from that demon brat to favorite student in the time span of a week. Now, on the day he had actually come back to Konoha for, he was nowhere to be seen. Last call, Uzumaki Naruto, Irika repeated. A shadow flew right under Mizuki's nose, making the silver-haired Chunin jump back in shock. The shadow quickly formed into the visage of Irika's missing student. The blonde was panting, and sweat was dripping from his chin. Running that fast really hurts. He got out between pants. But I'm not too late, am I, Irika-sensei? Irika shook his head in the negative. Right on time, join the rest of the class on the bleachers. Irika continued through the last 2 names on the class roll and nodded to himself. A full class, they would have to be split between himself and Mizuki for the taijutsu portion of the exam. Turning his wandering gaze to his class, Irika took in the looks of anticipation, excitement and joy that was present even in Sasuke's eyes. Snapping his folder shut with a snap, he grinned broadly at the class and had their immediate attention. Welcome to the Chunin exam, Class 3A. I expect all of you to pass today, so I will wish you all the very best of luck and hand over to Mizuki-sensei. Mizuki stepped forward. Thank you, Irika-sensei. Now then, class, the exams will be split into 4 different portions. The first is to test your shurikenjutsu, which will be graded on accuracy and speed with both kunai and shuriken. Following which will be the taijutsu segment of the exam, where you will spar against either me or Irika-sensei. after which is the written exam which will be held in the auditorium. The fourth and final part section is your ninjutsu. You will find out which jutsu when you are called for that part of the exam. Thank you, Mizuki-sensei. Now then, if you would all make your way to the range, we can get to work. The class made their way over to the usual throwing range, which had been outfitted recently specifically for the exam. Normally, it was just a bunch of trees, stumps, and logs that had targets either attached or painted onto them. Now, it had wooden dummies, moving targets that ran along wire, pop-up targets that you had to hit in the short amount of time it was there. Naruto's finger itched towards the steel push button that held his weapon's pouch closes, his entire body shaking in anticipation. He would ace the exam, and then his life could truly begin. Iruka called the students in alphabetical order via their surname. One by one, the soon-to-be ninja stepped up and took the throwing weapons provided by Mizuki. Iruka stood off slightly to one side, making notations in his folder, and was the one who went to check the targets before the next student came up. Slowly but surely the number of students waiting dwindled down until there was only 3 remaining. Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, and Yamanaka Ino. Sasuke was the first to step up, taking the provided kunai and shuriken from Mizuki with his usual smirk. Iruka clicked his stopwatch just as the course started up, and Sasuke's attention focused in on the targets. Thud, thud, thud. The first 3 targets went down in the first second. Naruto studied the Uchiha carefully, watching the slight twitch in his arms and wrist just before he threw his next shuriken. Although he couldn't see them directly, he could picture Sasuke's eyes snapping from one target to the next without blinking. If it weren't for his attitude, Naruto could really picture being best friends with Sasuke. Being rivals was the closest he would probably ever get to being friends with the Uchiha, and Naruto accepted his position with a mere smile. Iruka's voice broke through Naruto's musing, and the blonde stood up and made his way down the stone bleachers. He passed Sasuke, whose smirk grew even wider when they looked at each other, and Naruto grinned. The challenge had been made, and now Naruto needed to match the Uchiha's perfect score. Naruto took the shuriken and kunai from Mizuki, whose grimace was enough to confirm Naruto's earlier suspicion. People knew his status as a Jinchuriki. His nostrils flared as in took a deep breath, clearing his mind of his problems and focusing on the test at hand. His eyes narrowed and his muscles fell into a state of relaxed readiness. Being too tense would slow his reaction time, but relaxing too much would throw it off as well. Iruka pushed down on his stopwatch just as the course started up, not saying a word. In the field, ninja wouldn't get a heads up when a target was about to appear, so this would be no different. A target snapped upwards from behind a rock, followed quickly by a dummy sliding out from the other side of the field and a second target moving across the course on a zip line. Naruto's arms became a blur, dark streaks of gray flying from his fingertips. Thunk, thud, thud, crash. A kunai was so deeply pierced through the first target the tip could be seen from the other side. The target was made of thick, solid Konoha lumber, so it was quite a feat for a genin. 2 shuriken were buried into the dummy, one right between the eyes and the other where the heart of an actual human would be. The target from the zip line was lying on the floor of the range, broken into 3 pieces. Naruto heard Iruka sigh in annoyance, and he couldn't help but grin. Sasuke had broken the zip line target as well. More targets popped up, and Naruto kept up his perfect performance. By the time he was finished, a single grain of sweat had appeared on his forehead, and the range in front of him was littered with kunai and shuriken all in bullseye places. Iruka waved him off, a proud smile on his face, and Naruto made his way to where Shikamaru and the gang were sitting. As he passed Sasuke, who was sitting on his own, he nodded toward the Uchiha. Onyx's eyes lingered on his own cerulean before Sasuke nodded back, his brooding expression breaking into a smile for a second. Naruto grinned and ran along to the gang, Shino and Chuji congratulating him on his perfect performance, Shikamaru merely smiling. Kiba glared at Naruto for a minute before he clapped the blonde on the back. "So, Blondie, what was that little thing between you and the Uchiha?" Kiba questioned, his loud voice ringing in Naruto's ears. Said Blonde merely shrugged and cleaned his ear out with his pinky. "Don't know what you're talking about, dog breath." The taijutsu portion went a little differently. Alternatively, the students would fight Iruka or Mizuki whilst the other teacher stood towards the side and acted as referee while at the same time taking notes. At the end of each bout, the two teachers had a quiet chat outside of earshot, during which the students had enough time to gossip amongst each other about the fight. Names weren't being called in alphabetical order either. Irika seemed to be picking students at random. Naruto noticed one thing, however. All of the clan heirs, himself included, were being left until last for some reason. When the final match with Haruno Sakura ended, Naruto finally realized why. Several large sources of chakra appeared on the other side of the training dojo. Naruto's eyes flicked up towards where he thought the newcomers were, but found nothing but a wall. Frowning, Naruto turned back to the match, which was now Mizuki versus Shino. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end though. He knew someone else was in the room, someone that wasn't supposed to be there. Kakashi's eyebrow was raised in amusement, and Kenji was smiling proudly towards his son. The two men had decided to forgo the Hokage's crystal ball room. The amount of smoke in there was suffocating, and had come directly to the dojo. Kakashi, to see how good his new students were outside of a report, and Kenji, to see the next generation of Konoha shinobi. Although he also wanted to watch Naruto's fight in person. That boy could pull some strange but effective moves out of thin air at times. Said blonde's blue eyes had just trailed over both senior ninja, although their camouflage technique had done its job and Naruto was none the wiser. The two watched as the clan heirs stood up for their matches. There were 4 students remaining, the Nara child, the Hyuga heiress, the Yamanaka girl, and Naruto, when Kenji suddenly snapped to attention, his hand already on his sword's handle. Kakashi sniffed the air a few times and smiled, before placing a hand on the retired Jounin's shoulder. In a hushed voice, so as to not attract attention, he explained, "Just let things carry on. No one will get hurt too badly." The Hokage's council and Danzo have been pushing for a harder Chunin exam for years. The political pressure was getting to the point where Hokage-sama had to act soon. He decided to enact it this year. It's just a test, but the kids don't know that. Let it play out. Kenji frowned. Why the hell hadn't he been told then? Leaning back against the wall, he glared at Mizuki, who in turn was glaring at Naruto. Kakashi noticed that his sensei's partner's hand never left his sword. Uzumaki Neru dash. Irika was suddenly cut off by a kunai sticking out of his neck. The Chunin dropped to the ground, seemingly dead, and Mizuki was soon to follow, 3 shurikens sticking out of his back. The majority of the class screamed and tried to run for the doors, but found it blocked by 3 unknown ninja, wrapped in black garb from head to toe, leaving only a slit for their eyes. Several more appeared from the windows, standing over the bodies of Irika and Mizuki. The final ninja appeared slowly in the middle of the room, as if coming out of a mist or haze, who definitely the leader. He was dressed in the same black garb as the rest of the ninja, but he had a red cowl around his neck and strapped over his back was a ninjato. Naruto could almost see the smirk under that mask. He lifted his hand. First and second fingers rose and signaled towards the students. The group shinobi rushed forward, producing kunai and other knives, but didn't throw them. The class huddled up onto the stands, trying to get as far away as possible. The clan heirs stood forward, along with, surprisingly, Haruno Sakura. Naruto reached over his shoulder for his sword when he realized he didn't bring it with him. Fuck! Kiba launched forward, he and Akamaru already looking like feral twins, and Chuji had gone double size and was rolling forward like a bowling ball. Shino raised his arms, sending a massive wave of Kikai bugs towards the students behind him, which turned into a sort of wall. Shikamaru was standing next to Shino, defending Kiba and Chuji as much as possible with his shadow and ranged attacks. Ino had paired up with Sakura, and the pair had dashed forward in a flurry of yellow and pink. Naruto watched with amazement. The girl he thought was probably the most useless in the class was actually a pretty good kunoichi. Sakura's chakra control was to the point where even her standard clones seemed real. Clones. That's it. Naruto raised his fingers into a cross-shaped seal and called forth a group of clones. Assigning them to protect the group that wasn't fighting, he dashed forward to take on a ninja of his own. Sasuke was fighting one of the ninja just in front of his own mark, the leader. With an amazing amount of agility, Naruto barrel rolled under Sasuke and used his hands to launch forward into a drop kick. The red-cowled shinobi simply sidestepped the kick, surprised when a kunai cut his cheek. He looked at the blonde, whose arm was now extended and he was crouching on the ground. The leader's eyes narrowed. Damn Jinchuriki brat will get what's coming to him now. He launched forward, 2 kunai appearing in his hands, and went on the assault. Naruto bobbed and weaved, avoiding the kunai slashes as much as possible, trying to find an opening. Every now and then he managed to get a hit in using a slightly modified form of the academy-style taijutsu. Ducking low under a wild cut, he slipped a kunai of his own from his holster and tried to slash the man's legs, only to have him jump over the attack. Naruto, standing on his hands, slammed his heel backwards and up into the leader's stomach, sending him even higher into the air. The man spun around. When his front came back into view, 3 shuriken were in each hand. He threw them at the blonde with frightening speed, forcing the blonde to the ground to avoid them. He rolled and stood up only to find himself in range of another kunai assault. He had to find a way to beat this guy. And then he saw it in the form of Sasuke, who was preparing a jutsu no genin aside from himself should have the chakra capacity for. Sasuke, aim at me. Sasuke looked around just as he finished the seals for his jutsu, spewing a giant fireball towards the blonde. Naruto watched it come with a smile and spiraled into the leader, taking care to avoid the kunai. Latching onto the man's arms, he twisted him around and aimed the man's back towards the oncoming fireball. A feral grin twisted across Naruto's face, showing his fangs. The oncoming flame lit up his eyes, which held a glint of vengeance in them. Burn, bastard. The flame hit the man's back and continued around until it enveloped both Naruto and the leader. The clothes slowly burnt off the man, revealing the wide-eyed form of Mizuki? Naruto's brain kicked into overdrive, his hand whipping out towards the flames. They were suddenly pushed back before they died out, leaving an untouched Naruto and a severely burnt Mizuki in the middle of the room. The rest of the fighting was over, the ninja revealing themselves as the instructors of the academy. Kiba had several fresh bruises and cuts, but Chuji was seemingly unharmed. Sakura and Ino both sported new shiners, and both girls were holding their ribs. Sasuke was unharmed except for a single tiny cut across his left shoulder. Shino and Shikamaru were both fine. What surprised Naruto was the Hyuga girl. From what he had seen for the past week, the girl was rather shy and lacked a lot of confidence. But she was standing over 3 knocked-out bodies, the veins around her pale white eyes sticking out and pulsing. Her jaw was clenched and her back straight, as if she were proud of knocking out 3 instructors. Naruto grinned, he would be too. Several of the instructors came rushing over to Mizuki, grabbing him and rushing him out of the room, assumedly to the hospital. Naruto dropped to the ground, his fire manipulation technique taking its toll. Every time he used it, he felt drained in both body and mind. The first time he had used it, he had passed out for 3 days. Kenji had trained him carefully in its use, and now he could use it without passing out, but only just barely. They had assumed it was either an unknown bloodline limit from his mother, or one more gift of being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Kenji stood silently at the other of the room, his face blank. Kakashi shuddered and shuffled away a bit. Every time he had seen that face as a kid or even as an adult, it meant someone was in trouble. It was usually him, but this time he knew exactly who was going to be on the receiving end of Kenji's wrath. The Hokage. The rest of the exams went without incident. The injured got treated before the few students that hadn't run out of the academy attended the written exam. The jutsu portion was bad for Naruto. He was forced to make more shadow clones since his normal clones still stank. He was already feeling weak because of the fire manipulation, so he could only manage 3 with a decent amount of effort. It still managed to impress Irika, who couldn't even use the shadow clone technique. Naruto stared at the forehead protector he was presented with. The Konoha leaf emblazoned on the metal plate glinted brightly. He was finally a ninja, and in a couple of weeks he would be on a team and completing missions for the village. A soft smile wound its way across his face, as he carefully tied the forehead protector around his forehead in a manner that let his blonde locks fall over the front of it. Kenji stormed out of Sarutobi's office, his black and gold robes flaring behind him. The jade-green obi, which was tied into a rather extravagant but still manly bow at the back, whipped around behind him like a tail. Damn that old man. Damn him to hell and back. He had recognized the look in Mizuki's eyes when Naruto engaged him. That look of hatred and disgust, the one he hadn't seen for over 9 years. when he had taken Naruto from this forsaken village. What in Inari's name was he thinking when he brought the boy back here? Yelling in frustration, he punched the wall closest to him. His fist went straight through the plaster, luckily missing the framework within the wall. Yanking his arm back, he blew the dust from his knuckles and glared back towards the wooden door that barred the Hokage's office. He would have to take up a position as counsel now. Konoha could not be allowed to run like this. Over half the graduating class had left after that little stunt, effectively having the new generation of ninja. Taking a few deep breaths, Kenji counted backwards from 10, calming himself down. He needed to get back to the estate and see how Naruto was doing. The brunette was running along a power line, one of the many that ran across the village, when he noticed a flash of yellow in a nearby restaurant. Coming to a halt, he turned slightly so he could get a better look through the window. Sure enough, Naruto was in a Korean barbecue restaurant, surrounded by the rest of the clan heirs and the Haruno girl. What surprised him was Sasuke's presence, sitting slightly away from everyone else but still with the group. Looks like the Hokage had been right about one thing. Naruto's natural ability to change people had worked on even the stoic Uchiha. Shaking his head in amusement and pride, Kenji left the group to their celebration dinner. He would go and pack his things and leave tomorrow morning. There were a few people he needed to talk to, none of which resided in Konoha. Chapter 4. Survival Exam, Kakashi Style. An eagle soared overhead, its harsh cry echoing over the land. The raging yellow sun looked to be cooking the rocky mountain below, a hot sizzling sound coming from many of the rocks and outcrops. If one was to look carefully, they would be able to make out a wooden structure atop the mountain. Grasshoppers chirped and insects buzzed around. The cold-blooded animals like snakes and lizards were out on the hot rocks enjoying the heat wave. A figure, barely discernible to any ordinary human due to the haze of heat in the air, flew up from a part of the mountain that had plateaued. He landed on one of the first outcrops in a series that wound up the mountain. Kenji huffed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Rolling his shoulder, the man shifted his backpack into a more comfortable position before he focused chakra through his feet. Using the sudden force, Kenji seemed to almost fly up from his small chunk of sizzling rock to another, slightly larger one. A hissing sound drew his attention, and he looked down to find a rather large lizard trying to run away. Kenji had accidentally landed on its tail, picking up his foot just enough for the reptile to get free. He watched as it scurried off towards the edge of the outcrop. Not a second later, the eagle from before swooped down and caught the critter between its talons, its wings beating heavily to push away from the ground. Kenji shook his head and watched the beautiful creature fly away, the unlucky lizard wriggling in its grasp. He glanced up at the sun, trying to discern the time. It was nearing midday, and he still had half a mountain to climb. Why the hell did he have to set up camp on top of this mountain, of all possible places? Naruto stared at the wooden door. He had been avoiding going in there for almost 2 weeks now, but today he was finally going to find out what was behind it. Shigeru and Kid, Shigeru's granddaughter, were out visiting the Ikarakus. Examining the lock for a moment, Naruto found the corresponding key on his keychain and unlocked the door. Seals lit up, similar to the ones that covered the outside of the house, before fading away a minute later. The door creaked as it opened, giving the darkness beyond an even more eerie feeling to it. Naruto stepped forward into the darkness, and found it was a set of stairs that led down into what he assumed was a basement. As he walked, torches lit up along either side of the staircase, barely their seals grafted into the edges of them. Naruto recognized part of one as a sensory seal, and figured there must also be a fire generation seal somewhere as well. Once the sensory seal picked up someone's presence, the torches must light up and die out once the person left the sensory seal's range. That's pretty clever. Creepy as hell, but clever, thought Naruto. He finally reached the end of the stairs, and judging from the lack of windows guessed he was now underground. He took a step into the new room and immediately the place lit up. Not with torches but with strange seals that Naruto didn't recognize. They emitted as much light as a standard electric light and revealed the contents of the room. Scattered along the walls were shelves, filled to the brim with scrolls and books of all kinds. There were locked cupboards, scrolls thicker than both of Naruto's legs together, and paintings spread throughout the room as well. Standing in the middle of the room was a podium, a thick book sitting atop it. Ahead of the podium, against the furthest wall, was a kind of stand that held a formal black kimono, white obi and a haori, a formal jacket worn with a kimono. The haori had the Namikaze mon, crest, emblazoned on either side of the breast. The mirror behind the stand revealed a larger version of the crest on the back of the jacket as well. Stepping up to the podium, Naruto's hand reached out for the book on instinct. His fingers traced the bronze crest in the middle of the hard cover. Opening the book, the first page had no fancy decorations or paintings, but beautiful calligraphy writing. Tales of the Creed, History of the Namikaze. Naruto stared at the words. This was his clan's history, and this basement must have been the clan archives. He turned the page, surprised at the condition of the book. He didn't even know what the material was. Some kind of paper maybe, but it wasn't the paper used by those days standard. Naruto took the book down from the podium and sat on the ground, his legs folded under him. He was going to read this even if it took him all week. In an age of war, chaos and destruction, ninja were the tools of daimyos, selling their skills to the highest bidder. Clans existed not of families but of ninja with similar skills. Eventually, these ninja turned into the families that are known as clans today. We, the Namikaze, were no different, having no relation by blood whatsoever. However, we were unique in how we formed the clan. None of our skills were the same, and we all came from different parts of the land. We were all lone ninja, all extremely skilled, and we were some of the richest known through the land. Each one of us was hired by a daimyo that controlled a series of islands off the east coast. Our mission was simple: take over the mainland directly opposite the islands. It was in a tsunami of blood that the clan was born. We slaughtered hundreds of innocent people that, to this day, still haunt my dreams. It was the fact the daimyo had an entire army of soldiers waiting to kill us once we returned that we took over the islands, now known as the Land of Waves. We piled the bodies of the soldiers we killed that night on a hillside, their daimyo atop it, and burnt the remains. We became the leaders of Wave, and we took on a creed. We would become an undefeatable clan, one that specialized in all aspects of combat. However, we were like the ocean, calm, benevolent almost for the majority of the time, but when stirred we took no prisoners and destroyed everything in our path. We took the title of Namikaze, of Waves and Wind, due to our position as leaders of Wave, and the fact that all of us held the natural ability to manipulate the element of wind. Namikaze Genosuk. Head of the Namikaze Naruto was fascinated by his clan's history. What surprised him, though, was how the book was written. He had seen the Sarutobi family scroll, and it was all written by one person in the third person. However, this was more like a journal, and each new passage was written by a different person. Naruto quickly became immersed in the book, and would be sitting in the archives for a while yet. Kakashi frowned. He was having a hell of a day. First, he was late for a meeting with the Hokage, and not because he was at the memorial stone, but because he was up all night reading and overslept. And then, after finding out his future team, he went to check up on them. Sasuke was the easiest. The boy was just training in the forest that edged the Uchiha sector. He was beaten half to death following Sakura, when he was accidentally caught watching the female side of the hot springs from a tree. At least he got some valuable information from both trips. The first was that Sasuke was obsessed with power, specifically to kill his brother, and would be willing to go to any lengths to get it. The boy also talked to himself when he thought no one was around, not exactly stable in Kakashi's book. And Sakura was more focused on how she looked than her training. At least Sasuke wasn't a liability in a fight, but Sakura would be nothing but dead weight. She had spent the entire day before going to the bathhouse either searching for Sasuke or looking at some new fad diet in the local chemist. And now, to add more onto his plate, he couldn't find his third soon-to-be student, Uzumaki Naruto, anywhere. He had searched the restaurants, training grounds, and shinobi stores all around Konoha and found neither head nor tail of the blonde. He had searched the Namikaze grounds and still not found the boy. The only place he hadn't searched was the Namikaze compound itself, and that was because he didn't have a key. He knew from experience what the seals surrounding that house did, and quite frankly, he didn't want to be fried to a crisp anytime soon. So yeah, Kakashi was having a bad day. He knew that it was getting late, and he would be expected at the Jounin long soon. It was his shout tonight after losing a bet to Guy. He started towards the trees when he heard the sound of a door sliding open. Looking around, he saw his missing genin and sighed in annoyance. Just when he decided to leave, the boy shows up.
Annoying brat. Kropka.
The silver-haired Jounin disappeared into the trees, taking care not to leave any sign of his presence behind. This kid had been trained by Kenji, so it wouldn't surprise him if he had above-average skills. He watched with interest as the blonde walked to a grassy clearing just off from the clearing the house was in. He was carrying a ninjato in his left hand and a scroll in the other. Training? Kakashi mentally questioned. Kakashi watched for at least an hour, mesmerized by how Naruto trained. First, he summoned one shadow clone, which took exactly half the boy's chakra, and then they sparred. There was no fancy footwork, no flashy or graceful moves. Everything he did was effective, brutally so, and economic. He wasted no energy. He never overextended. He used rather odd techniques that, while seemingly ridiculous at first, were vicious when carried through. This fighting style was reminiscent of Kenji's, but at the same time completely different. Kenji used a katana. His footwork was graceful, and he delivered powerful attacks that conserved his energy. However, both father and adopted son used the same techniques, just slightly modified for the shorter ninjato, and both could absolutely decimate an enemy. It was amazing that a child no older than 13 could wield a sword to such an extent. His single eye glanced up towards the sky and he almost swore. He was going to be late to the bar. Oh well, not like they weren't used to it. Looking one more time at Naruto, he smiled in anticipation. He couldn't wait until the end of the week. Blue eyes were locked with brown, sparks flying between the pair. Nostrils flared and steam seemed to fly from them, the motion repeated by the counterpart. One stomp, then another, and the blue eyes finally turned skyward as their own screamed in frustration. Fine. Alright already. I'll show you the technique. Sheesh. The little brown-eyed boy smirked in triumph, his arms folding across his chest and his nose turning up toward the clouds. Naruto's eyebrow twitched and he promptly rapped his knuckles across the boy's head. Don't act all high and might, Konohamaru. I'm only teaching you because I will be an official ninja tomorrow, so I won't be able to use this technique as much. Konohamaru pouted for a moment but perked up when Naruto started to walk away, waving his hand over his shoulder for the honorable grandson to follow. The pair walked along the streets of Konoha, Naruto pointing out the beautiful women and how they looked. He snuck Konohamaru into the adult section of the magazine store and showed him the swimsuit models and the latest edition of Kunoichi Weekly, which showed the latest in Kunoichi fashion. All of their models deadly beautiful. After their attempt to sneak into the hot springs for the final bit of research, actual naked women, Naruto had been beaten to the point where he could barely walk. After that incident, Naruto decided they had researched enough and he took off for one of the less used training grounds, which doubled as a park on certain days of the week. Thankfully, today was not one of those days and the two boys had the entire grounds to themselves. He had promised Sarutobi that he would look after Konohamaru for a little while today, since Ebisu and Asuma were out on missions and not due back until that night. The kid's parents had died when he was young, maybe a year old. Thankfully, he didn't remember it all that well, and still had his uncle and grandfather to look after him. Naruto stopped reminiscing and turned to face the annoying situation at hand. The damn brat had pestered Naruto to teach him the jutsu he had used on Sarutobi a few days ago when he wanted to share lunch with the old man. The blood loss had made him woozy and agreeable to whatever Naruto suggested. Naruto got a free meal, and the Hokage ended up with an empty wallet. Right then, Naruto stated, "This is my original technique. Treat it with as much respect as you would your own. Watch carefully now." Naruto's fingers nimbly ran through the seals for his jutsu. Finishing on the ram, he smirked at Konohamaru before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. In his place was a naked, voluptuous, curvy blonde with long slender legs and a set of D-sized breasts. Her finger was against her lip, biting her fingernail in a rather adorable manner. Konohamaru nodded, taking in the details of the jutsu with many choruses, "Oh," and "I see." The transformation dropped, revealing the fully equipped Naruto. Ever since the surprise test at the academy, he had taken to carrying his ninjato or scroll-sealed katana and broadsword with him at all times. A proud smile on his face, he declared the name of his technique. Uzumaki prank art number 1. Sexy technique. Konohamaru nodded, his eyes burning with determination. My turn, my turn. The boy made the seals necessary for the transformation. A cloud of smoke later, an obese brunette was winking towards Naruto. Shuddering, the blonde shook his head and told the boy to try again. The second attempt wasn't any better and Naruto mentally whimpered. This was going to be a long day. Old man. Old man. Sarutobi sighed and looked up from his calligraphy. He was thankful that Naruto could distract Konohamaru for a few hours, but it was his fate to suffer the assassination attempts of his grandson. Turning around on his cushion, he took a long draw on his pipe and prepared himself to get up and help his grandson, who would inevitably trip on his scarf. Again. Konohamaru burst through the sliding doors and smirked, raising his hands that were held in the ram seal. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. Jutsu? No, not that one. Uzumaki prank art number 1. Sexy technique. Konohamaru version. A seductive young brunette took a few steps towards the sandame, her breasts jiggling with each step. Sarutobi's eyebrow twitched once, twice, thrice, and a torrent of blood poured from his nose, sending the old man crashing into his calligraphy. The technique fell away from Konohamaru, who was holding his arm out, his fingers held in a V for victory. Elsewhere, Naruto felt a cold chill run down his spine and he immediately regretted teaching Konohamaru that jutsu. Irika walked into the academy, a wide grin on his face and more relaxed than he had been all year. For the last 2 weeks, he had been relaxing in a resort a few miles from Konoha, famed for its hot springs ability to heal the body and the soul. After 2 weeks of soaking, reading his favorite books and just overall enjoying himself, he was once again ready to face his duty as a sensei one last time before being reassigned while the academy was out. He walked through the empty halls, remembering the times with his class from their first year through to now. He approached the classroom and smiled. He could hear them through the walls. Only a third of the original class had passed the test, and now they would be split into their teams to begin their career as ninja of Konoha. Sliding the open door, he was shocked that he immediately had their attention. Normally, it took at least 5 minutes of shouting to get them to settle down. He saw them all smiling proudly, their forehead protectors gleaming in the sunlight that shone through the large window. Most were wearing the strips of cloth and metal around their forehead, but some had them around their arms and necks. A few even used them as belts. Shaking his head with a small grin, he made his way over to the podium and glanced down at the roster he had carried in with him. All right then, I won't go over how proud I am of you. I gave you that speech 2 weeks ago. Today, you will be separated into 3-man cells and assigned to a Jounin sensei. Now then, Team 1 is... Irika continued through the list until he finally reached the last 3 teams. Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura and Uchiha Sasuke will make up Team 7. Your Jounin sensei is Hatake Kakashi. Naruto bowed his head in acceptance. It was an odd setup, but he was used to being unpredictable. It was one of his finer traits. Sasuke looked as nonchalant as ever, as if the news meant absolutely nothing to him. Only Naruto and Irika noticed the slight upturned corner of his lips. Sakura was screaming with delight, chanting something about love conquers all, and Ino was screaming that she would kill Sakura. Team 8 will be Hyuga Hinata, Inazuka Kiba and Aburame Shino. Your sensei is Yuhi Kurinai. Team 9 is still in circulation from last year. Team 10 will be Akimichi Chuji, Nara Shikamaru and Yamanaka Ino, under Sarutobi Asuma. Naruto looked up at that. He didn't know Asuma was going to be one of this year's sensei. He suddenly felt very sorry for Team 10. Asuma was one of the laziest people he knew, but he always showed up on time. Not a minute after that thought, Asuma walked through the door with a black-haired woman with crimson-colored eyes. Naruto immediately placed her as Yuhi Kurinai. One by one, the teams were taken away until there was no one left in the room except for Team 7. Naruto clicked his tongue in annoyance and decided to flex his prankster muscle a bit. Whoever Hatake Kakashi was, he was gonna cop it when he got here. Sakura watched with barely veiled enthusiasm and Sasuke looked on with mild interest as Naruto went back and forth between the storeroom and the classroom. Naruto's prank started out simple, but gradually got more and more complex to the point where even Sasuke was impressed with it. Now all they had to do was sit and wait. Kakashi slid open the door to the classroom, figuring he had made his team wait long enough. Immediately, his danger sense kicked it, but he ignored it in favor of looking at his team. Sasuke was sitting off to the far side of the room, staring through the window with that brooding look of his. Sakura was trying to get Sasuke to go on a date with her, with little success, and Naruto was sitting atop the desk in the back corner of the room, running a whetstone along the blade of his sword. He took a step into the room and went to speak, when his danger sense started to scream at him. He noticed a sliver of light reflect off something attached to Naruto's sword, before it disappeared with a twang. A bucket, filled with pink paint, dropped onto the Jounin's head. Sasuke yanked a cord, and several pillows shattered over him, covering him in down. If that wasn't enough, a duster came flying at him from the blackboard and smacked into the side of his head, causing Kakashi to look around and see a second Naruto flipping a second duster in his hand. Kakashi glared at all three of his students, ignoring the clone with the duster. "My first impression is, I hate you. Get up to the roof." The Jounin disappeared in a swirl of leaves, heading towards his apartment. He would get changed and then join his team once again. "Right then," said a newly showered Kakashi. "Since we are going to be a team, how about we introduce ourselves, Kakashi-sensei, how do you want us to do that?" Sakura asked, her hand slightly raised. Kakashi's eye curved upward into a weird kind of upside-down V. "Tell us your name, likes, dislikes, dreams for the future, hobbies, things like that. And you don't need to raise your hand. You aren't a student anymore." Sakura giggled nervously and put her hand back down. "Why don't you go first, sensei? Give us something to go off." Kakashi blinked once, before shrugging in an "I guess so" kind of manner. "Well, I'm Hatake Kakashi. Things I like and things I hate. Guess I don't feel like telling you that. My dreams for the future. Never really taken the time to think about it. As for my hobbies, well, I have lots of hobbies." Sakura's eyebrow twitched. That told them nothing aside from his name, which they already knew. Naruto shook his head in a kind of amusement, causing Kakashi to do that eye smile thing of his and look across at the blonde. "Okay, you can go first, blondie." Naruto shrugged and nodded. "Okay, well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, swords, family, and training. I dislike people who treat family and loved ones as trash, and people who don't appreciate the value of hard work. My hobbies: collecting antique swords, gardening, and finding new jutsu to use in conjunction with my sword. Dreams for the future, not sure really. Make my parents and loved ones proud, I guess." Kakashi nodded, kind of glad he had at least one normal person on his team, even if he did have a demon sealed in his gut. Turning to Sakura, he waited patiently for her to start. When he realized she was too busy staring at Sasuke, he sighed and cleared his throat. "Tinky, your turn." Sakura tore her star-struck eyes from Sasuke and glared at Kakashi for a second before speaking.
I'm Haruno Sekure.
"I like." Giggle. "I hate Ino Pig. I like memorizing facts and collecting things." Her eyes trailed to Sasuke for a minute. "In the future, I want to marry." Another round of giggling ensued. Kakashi and Naruto sighed in unison. They had both seen how well she performed during the fake attack on the academy, utilizing the basics to their fullest extent, but now she was just some annoying fangirl. How could someone's personality change so quickly? "Okay, Brooder, you're up." Sasuke turned his glare onto Kakashi, having no effect whatsoever. "Hn. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I don't like much and I dislike a lot. My hobby is training. My dream, no, more of an ambition, is to kill a certain man and rebuild my clan." Kakashi nodded. It was obvious to him who Sasuke was talking about, but Naruto looked confused and Sakura was once again staring at Sasuke with nothing but adoration in her eyes. The Jounin wondered how long it would take to snap her out of her fangirl phase, and hoped that he could manage it before the team started to go on more serious missions outside the village. "Well then, meet me tomorrow morning at Training Ground 7, 5 a.m., for a survival exam." Sakura's head snapped around to face her sensei. "But we already did survival training in the academy, Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi's eye smile turned almost sinister. "Not this survival exam, you haven't. If you fail this, you fail as a genin. You will be sent back to the academy. Make sure you come prepared. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll just puke. Sakura's harsh shriek of "what?" signified Kakashi's cue to exit. Naruto looked at where Kakashi was standing a moment ago, his eyes slightly wider than normal. That Shunshin technique was fast. Way faster than his own was. Turning to his new team, Naruto figured he may as well try to get to know them better than he did. After all, he had only met them just shy of a month ago. Sakura, Sasuke, do you want to go grab something to eat? Sasuke grunted and walked away, Sakura following him, crying about a date. Naruto sighed and hung his head. So much for that idea. Maybe he could go hang out with Shikamaru and Chuji. They were bound to need comfort food after being stuck with Ino. Kenji drank deeply from the tea that had been offered to him. He had to leave today. It had taken him a week to convince him to come down from his mountain. The sun was hidden today, and the air was starting to cool in the changing months. He drained the cup dry and carefully placed it back onto the serving tray. The pottery was a work of art. He didn't want to break it by accident. So, how have you managed to get your clone to last so long? The black-haired youth across from him stared into Kenji's eyes for a minute, before shifting his collar down enough to reveal a tattoo over his heart. Kenji's eyes widened. He had only seen that seal once before, and the guy who wore it had gone insane. Not to worry, Kenji-senpai, the youth started. I worked out the errors in the seal. It works as it was originally intended, and no adverse side effects have been noted as of yet. Kenji shook his head in worry. But, splitting your soul like that? Itachi, you are insane. Itachi smiled softly. That theory is quite possibly correct. Sadness seemed to creep into Itachi's usually stoic eyes, and Kenji quickly changed the subject. So, I'll see you in a few months then? Itachi nodded as he stood up, taking his tea tray into his small kitchen. Coming back out, he handed a scroll to Kenji, who pocketed it without looking at it. He knew exactly what it was anyway. The sword master rolled his neck as he stood up, his knees cracking as they were flexed after hours of sitting in the one spot. He picked up his pack, stocked with scrolls of meat, rice and fruit, his camping gear and a few scrolls filled with nothing but bottles of water. Heaving it onto his back, he picked up his katana from the edge of the door and waved over his shoulder to Itachi before jumping down the mountainside. Later, kid. Itachi watched as his favorite mentor slid down the side of the mountain, his chakra forming a kind of platform under his feet. Looking across to the clear sky, he couldn't help but smile. It would be nice to get off this dreary mountain for a while and see how life had progressed in his few years away from it. 3 tired, hungry children dragged themselves into the clearing of Training Ground 7. 3 training logs sat ominously towards the edge of the clearing, a forest surrounding most of it and a river running across the back. Naruto grunted in greeting, getting a yawn in return from Sakura and nothing from Sasuke. With a sigh, he dumped his blue pack against a tree and sat down beside it, leaning against the tree in an attempt to get a little more shut-eye. The group sat around, waiting for at least 3 hours before Kakashi finally showed up, a well-worn edition of Jiraiya's first book in his Aika series, Aika Paradise, in his hand. Sakura was immediately on her feet at the sight of their God-forbidden teacher. You're late. Kakashi waved his free hand nonchalantly. Sorry. I saw a black cat on my way here and had to take the long way around. Liar. Naruto shook his head, trying to free it of the ringing caused by Sakura's shrill screaming. He watched Kakashi walk over to the logs and place an alarm clock atop the middle one. He also placed 3 bento lunchboxes beside the alarm clock. The one-eyed Jounin slowly turned to face his team, and one could almost see the sadistic smirk under that mask of his. He lifted up a pair of silver bells and jingled them ominously. The rules are simple. You need to get these bells before noon. Whoever doesn't get a bell will be tied to a log while the rest of us eat lunch and then be sent back to the academy. But, Kakashi-sensei, there are only 2 bells, Sakura pointed out. Which means only 2 of you will pass this exam. A fire seemed to light up in Sasuke's eyes, and Sakura started to worry for her chances of staying with Sasuke. She knew that if anyone on the team had a chance of getting those bells, it was Sasuke and Naruto and most definitely not her. Naruto frowned, his eyebrows knitted in confusion. Kakashi I smiled, and raised his hand. You'll have to come at me with the intent to kill. Begin. Immediately, the three genin blurred out of the clearing. Kakashi gave them a moment before he searched for them with practiced ease. He had to nod approvingly. Sasuke and Sakura were hidden well for genin. Now, where was Naruto? Oh, there. In the exact spot he had been standing when the exam started. You know, Naruto ninja generally hide and strike from the shadows. Naruto smirked and folded his arms across his chest. Screw that. I'm gonna take one of those bells right now. With that, Naruto charged forward, his fist cocked back as he ran. Kakashi sighed. It looked like he was wrong about his blonde student. Naruto got in range and went to throw his fist forward, which Kakashi moved to block, but suddenly changed tactics mid-attack. The blonde used the momentum from his swing, which was pulled short, to spin up into a heel kick aimed at Kakashi's neck. Said man quickly grabbed Naruto's ankle, only to find that the blonde had twisted in a rather strange manner and was aiming a punch at Kakashi's face. Kakashi pushed off from the genin and had to duck a barrage of punches and kicks that came from Naruto once again. Kakashi bobbed and weaved, all the while his book was in his offhand and he continued to read, although only just. He noticed Naruto beginning to slow down and took advantage of the situation. His speed kicked into overdrive, and Kakashi appeared crouching behind the blonde. He made a tiger seal and heard Sakura scream at Naruto to run.
Kono agakure iden. Taijutsu no ouji. Sennen goroshi.
Kakashi thrust his fingers forward and into Naruto's rear end, enhancing the dramatized poke with chakra to send the boy flying. As Naruto flew forward, he seemed to grin for a moment before bursting in a cloud of smoke, leaving Kakashi looking shocked. A shadow clone. Damn, kid is smart. Meanwhile, Naruto felt a sudden rush of chakra and adrenaline, and the memories of what had happened to his clone passed on to him. Naruto shuddered and covered his backside for a moment, before snapping out of it. He tugged the wires of his trap to make sure they were good and tight before turning and running from his spot. That should be all the traps done. Now he just had to find Sasuke and Sakura and convince them to work with him. When he found Sasuke and Sakura, he was kind of shocked. Sasuke was buried up to his neck underground, glaring at the unconscious form of Sakura, who was lying a few meters away. He landed next to Sasuke, making sure to keep it light and not the usual heavy thud. Leaning down, he smiled at Sasuke and held a finger up in front of his lips, signaling for the Uchiha to remain silent. I have an idea, and I need both yours and Sakura's help. I know you want to get a bell for yourself, but let's face it. None of us can take on a Jounin alone and expect to win. But if we team up, we may be able to distract him long enough to get the bells. Sasuke glared at Naruto and started to state his refusal when he found Naruto glaring back at him. Naruto hadn't ever gotten angry in his entire time at the academy, and whenever the pair sparred, Naruto remained focused but never angry when he lost. This look, it was almost as terrifying as his father's was, when he was still alive. With a grudging nod, he agreed to Naruto's help. Naruto took a kunai from his pouch and dug around Sasuke enough to let the boy wriggle his shoulders free of the hard earth. The shorter of the boys then proceeded to grab the trapped one under the arms and tug, gradually pulling him free. The pair proceeded to wake up Sakura, who immediately agreed to help. Whether it was because Sasuke had already agreed or because she knew she had no chance by herself, Naruto wasn't sure. The blonde quickly explained his plan and pointed out where his traps were prepared. He'd make clones to set off the traps at the right time, but ultimately it was up to Sakura to fulfill the hard part of the plan, that was actually getting the bells. Kakashi was sitting against a tree, reading his book. His team had been silent for a while now, and it was getting pretty close to midday as well. He had thought this team would be the one that finally broken his streak of failing genin teams, but apparently he had thought wrong. What a shame, each one of them had major potential as well. He flipped to the next page when he heard the high-pitched whistling associated with throwing weapons. He grinned and moved off his tree, which was impaled not a second later with a myriad of kunai and shuriken. He had to quickly dodge the blurred form of Sasuke, who was attacking with his usual aggression and grace. What surprised him was Naruto's presence dropping from above, sword unsheathed and coming down in an overhead swing. Kakashi pushed back off Sasuke, making sure the Uchiha boy was out of range of Naruto's swing, only to find another barrage of shuriken and kunai flying at him from both left and right. He had two options: keep retreating back, or use his own kunai to deflect the oncoming projectiles. He didn't have time to make the decision. Naruto and Sasuke made it for him. Sasuke had prepared to, once again, use his family's fireball technique, and Naruto had a rather large shuriken spinning so fast that it had blurred into a circle of gunmetal gray. Jumping back, he had to dodge another rain of kunai and shuriken, as well as avoid Naruto's giant shuriken. He used a quick replacement as Sasuke let loose with his fire jutsu. He appeared slightly off to the side of the boys and ready to knock out the two when he saw a pinkish-red blur shoot across in front of him, a part of the blur flashing silver. Surprised, he backpedaled away from Sakura when he noticed something in her hand, something that should have been attached to his belt. He looked down in horror to find not only the bells were gone, but his belt had also been slashed and his pants were starting to fall. How the hell had Sakura gotten so close without the girl's chakra alerting him to her presence? He smiled just as the alarm went off. Well, that was interesting. Meet back in the clearing. The group made their way back to the clearing. Kakashi lagged behind a bit to give a bit of first aid to his belt, which involved tying a bandage around the two split ends and hoping that it held long enough. He looked over him team, impressed with what they had achieved. However, there was still some time to screw with them a little.